two-story house.
Oh.
And it's got this, it's a corner lot and it's 2 stories and got high roofs, right? So they saw like the husband out there. He was he was like putting up some kind of, inflatable thing. What's he doing? So that night they come back and there is a giant like 30-foot, 45-foot skeleton, inflatable skeleton that is like it's attached to the lower part and the higher part of the house. So that skeleton is like King Kong climbing.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, that is so cool.
Yeah, that's kind of like Marcy,
Yeah.
sort of, but I don't think it's like that high, but
It was huge.
yeah. Some people go all out. Yeah.
I was like, shoot, you guys gonna have to it's like, you're gonna have to get someone to go out there and make sure it's up to code. Is the base wide enough?
That's funny.
Run upstairs and come down. Yeah, the
Just one.
clock, yeah, the clock. Yeah.
Oh. Is there one in there? No. Okay. I'll be right back. Okay.
I would do it. Just ran upstairs and I forgot something.
That's fine. I want to get too much exercise.
Yes,
Crazy.
that is crazy.
No.
It'd be interesting to see what happens at the forest thing.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by
However many people show up for that.
Yeah, there'll probably be a group. Sorry, we're talking about that.
No, it's
you
not your
entered
fault.
7585887. This meeting ID does not exist. Please re-enter your meeting ID followed by.
Hey, Julie, what's up?
You entered
No,
75857360887. This meeting ID does not exist.
Well, I have the.
Oh,
the SD
probably
card
not. I'll
right
call her.
here.
See if she'll answer.
Did what's his name? Yeah, it's on the SD card right here. Yeah.
Can you also bring the that phone down? The conference room?
Yeah,
Okay.
just go for it.
Not if it's charged. It should be charged.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Plug it into MC's computer because yours is the one that has the SD card reader on it right now. Yeah, you just take it and pull it off from there. Now I went and plugged it in. Okay, I went and plugged it in and I told the kid, hey, here's the thing, right? So I don't know if he went back and started filming again, but this is what I got. So okay.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID.
So just come to the board chambers. I'll see you in a second. Bye. Oh boy. Okay. My brother's doing another video.
Enter your participant ID.
in high school, and he grabbed the wrong SD card.
Oh.
So he's freaking out.
You are in the meeting now. You are the first participant. Please stand by. This meeting is being recorded.
Are we good to go? Okay.
can go on and start, Mr. Chairman. I'll catch up.
All right, thanks. Board, are we ready? Okay, so let's go ahead and call to order this meeting of the Amador County Board of Supervisors for Tuesday, October 12th, 2021 at 9 a.m. The board met in closed session, and on item 1A, conference with labor negotiators direction was given. And the confidential minutes were approved unanimously. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, public matters not on the agenda. These are discussion items only. No action will be taken. Any person may address the board at this time upon any subject within the jurisdiction of the Amador County Board of Supervisors. However, any matter that requires action may be referred to staff and/or committee for a report and recommendation for possible action at a subsequent board meeting. Please note there is a 3-minute time limit, and I've been asked to try to hold people to that. So does anybody have any public comment here in the board chambers? We have someone racing down. Please state your name.
Check. Okay. Good morning, Board of Supervisors. This is Michelle with Code Enforcement. I just wanted to give some important information to the public. There is a grant that Amador RCD is doing for free residential roadside chipping. This grant is going to expire at the end of the month, and it's important that we try to get as many people to utilize this. Sorry, I ran. To use this program because it is expiring at the end of the month, and if we don't use the money, obviously the grant may not get renewed. So if people are interested, it is a, just to give a little information, it is to help residents to do their fire protection distance from their house. What they will take is basically, I'll just read a few here. So it is a first come, first served basis. It is limited to services of individual customers to no more than 4 hours per visit. So they will actually chip stuff up to 4 hours on your property. So they do have some requirements. So I'm going to give the website, but some of the prohibited items are the pile of leaves, pine needles, or yard chipping, poison oak, decaying wood, varieties of broom. No commercial properties or commercial businesses could use this. Blackberries, vines, or anything with thorns, root balls, stumps, dirts, or twigs. So pretty much tree branches, stuff like that. And again, there are some requirements that they'd like you to do. This is on their website, but you then go ahead and contact them, and then they again will come out and wood chip it for you free of charge.
But the individual, the property owner has to actually clear the brush first. I mean, actually cut the brush.
Yeah, so that they want it set up and ready to go, so that way they can come out and do it right there. Again, you could put a large amount out there that what they could do for 4 hours. And then obviously I was trying to check to see if the green waste program is still happening at the Pine Grove transfer station. No one was there to confirm that, just to see, but I would have said any leftovers, that would have been somewhere to take it to, but until we get that, unless.
This will be our last month for that.
Is it? Okay.
That was my understanding too.
Michelle, what was the website?
So the website's going to be www.amador.org/chipping-roadside. So there's an Amador RCC, there are 2 R's, so .org/chipping/roadside. Again, I just want to encourage people to use that, especially since we had fires, to clear their property, take advantage of this free program. And we want to use it all so that way we can hopefully get it again to continue the program. That's it. Thank you.
What was the, last day for this?
It's going to be October 31st. So you do need to, I would go on the website. It does tell you all the stuff that you need to do, who to contact, and then get it ready, and then you just submit it, and then they'll tell you when they come out. But again, it has to be done by October 31st. So that way the grant can be used for it.
Good info, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other public comment from the audience? Okay, any Zoomers? Yeah, that sounds better. Any Zoomers have public comment? Anybody raising their hand there?
Frank?
Going once? Yes, Supervisor Brown.
Yeah, got some bad news from the governor signed AB 1346 after our letters requesting him to deny it, but he went ahead and signed it over the weekend.
Yeah, when I after the board meeting, I looked up and that bill had already passed the legislature, so I mailed the letter of opposition directly to the governor.
Right.
Okay.
And so now it'll be going to, I think it was resources, environmental resources first, and then it'll be going to, I guess, CARB. So I'm going to try to find out what else we can do to help the upcountry and and dealing with some of our like generators and others, equipment and stuff.
I think
read
a
an
new
article
governor.
this weekend that said the CARB is already starting to implement this, even though 2024 is the date, but they said there's 30 million set aside to help businesses to deal with the impacts, but they already said the 30 million is not enough to cover all the businesses. Right, but like we have, limited smogging up, in the county, is there other things that we could do to stay within the law, but, and try to help, Amador County? So that's our next goal, is to try to figure something else out. We can buy our chainsaws in Nevada now, I guess. I agree.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that update. Any other public comment?
I'm not going to say too much because I've been watching this train wreck coming, and you talk to people that work at Caltrans. The snow blowers don't work. They have to haul some of them down from like up to the high elevation cables down lower country, get it warm, get it started, and haul it back up, hope it'll work. And when the head guy from CARB shows up, and one of my friends is there, works for Caltrans, he's telling his boss, hey, the man from CARB was saying about how all this equipment is wonderful and great. And this friend of mine is telling his boss, tell him it doesn't work. Oh, no, we don't want to cause no problems. So finally, I guess this guy say it doesn't work. And the man from CARB, I guess, has a pretty good accent. And he, what do you mean it doesn't work? He says it doesn't work. It won't run. But that's what's going on with some of the stuff. The diesel motors are having from CARB. They're having a lot of issues. They had 3 graders a while back. They went and retrofitted them. These are older graders. I think 1 burned up, 2 wouldn't run. So they called up, I don't remember, I think it was John Deere, and said, can we get the old parts back, put them back to stock? So I think they got exemption finally from CARB. Well, they couldn't get the old parts that they'd taken off, so they had to all buy brand new sheet metal and exhaust fittings and whatever to put on the older graders to get them run. But I don't know, it's a train wreck, but it seems like that's where we're going.
Well, what was done might be able to be undone. Let's go to RCRC and CSAC and have them try to educate the legislature. You can always modify some legislation, and especially with these catastrophic fires going on, I think it seems to me to be the wrong time to make some of these changes. You're helping the environment while our environment is being hurt by all the fires. So, well, just to add on is we have CAL FIRE in the back of our audience right now, but just their base camp in Placerville, there was probably at least 40, 50 small Honda generators that would not be able to be sold in California, sitting there lighting up their base camp for safety. So there's just the thought on this was not, properly done. So that's just something we need to educate everybody else on.
What I'd like to know, they say all the equipment's out there to replace the existing small equipment now. I haven't seen a chainsaw bigger than 18 or 20 inches that's electric.
No.
I looked, tried to find one, couldn't find them, so I don't know what they're gonna do. I mean, I'm sure CAL FIRE uses bigger chainsaws than 18 inches or 20 inch saw when they're doing their firefighting, activities. The people on, the tree crews for PG&E, they use them 42-inch bar on some of the bigger trees. So I don't know, it's just, I think it wasn't thought out. It's basically about like us telling all the people in the Bay Area they should have a cow to eat the grass in their backyard. They don't have any cows down there. That's what they're kind of telling us.
Yeah, they actually have a lot of cows in the Bay Area. Anyway,
Some areas. I mean, for the apartment complex, you know, the high rises.
oh, yeah, in the East Bay, all over the hills. Anyway, any other public comment? All right, looking for approval of the agenda.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman, as presented.
All right,
Second.
motion by Supervisor Cruz, second by Supervisor Neto. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries. On the consent agenda, item 5K is going to be pulled for next time, correct? Or for a future date, actually. So we won't be voting on that. So I will entertain a motion with that.
That was 5K, correct?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda with 5K held over for a future meeting.
I'll second.
Motion by Supervisor Neto, second by Supervisor Forrester to approve the consent agenda. Is there any public comment on that by chance? Okay, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Regular agenda, we're moving on to item 4A, which is the update from the Amador County Health Officer, Dr. Rita Kerr, and I see her up on Zoom there. So on the COVID-19. Good morning, Dr. Kerr.
Good morning. How's the audio this morning? You able to hear me?
Good. Good.
Okay, good morning, board. Good morning, Amador community. It's been 2 weeks since I last updated this meeting. And for COVID-19 in Amador County, year to date, there have been 2,110 cases of COVID-19 confirmed in Amador residents, excluding Mule Creek State Prison inmates. That's an additional 248 cases confirmed since 2 weeks ago. 3,342 confirmed cases since the beginning of the pandemic in Amador County residents. To date, 246 residents, which is an increase of 7, are known to have been hospitalized for COVID-19. And currently there are 8 COVID patients in Sutter Amador Hospital. That's the first time we've gone below double digits in about 2 months, happened over the weekend. So that's good news. Of those 8, 5 are Amador County residents, 3 reside in other jurisdictions, and none of them were vaccinated. Sutter Amador Hospital continues to be impacted by COVID. The ICU is full at capacity with 4 of the 6 beds treating COVID patients, one of whom has been in the hospital for 48 days. Regional ICU availability has improved, with the greater Sacramento area now having over 30% of beds available. So again, the trend is in the right direction, region-wide and statewide. Unfortunately, 54 Amador County residents, that's 2 additional since my last report, and Mule Creek State Prison inmates holding steady at 9 have died of COVID-19. The 2 additional residents' deaths were a woman in her 80s who was vaccinated but had multiple underlying medical conditions, and a man in his 60s who was unvaccinated. Public Health expresses our condolences to all who are mourning the loss of a loved one to COVID-19. Chuck, if you would put up the bar graph epi curve, I'll talk about what the trends are looking like. Overall, the state of California is at the substantial level of COVID-19 transmission on the CDC's map, but Amador County itself remains at the high level rate. Monthly confirmed case episode totals, July were 222, August went up to 654, and September trending downward at 536. You can see by this bar graph that in early September, weekly totals were in the 110 to 120 range. And then we had an uptick during the week of the 19th through the 25th at 145 case episodes. But the trend has been back down over the last couple of weeks, still over 100 cases a week currently. Right now, there are 101 Amador County resident cases in isolation, which is our definition of an active case. Given the ongoing high level of community transmission of COVID-19 in Amador County, everyone is advised to wear a mask indoors when in public, regardless of vaccination status. Unvaccinated persons are still required to be wearing a mask indoors and in public. Avoid poorly ventilated spaces, and if you can't keep your distance in a crowd outdoors, masking is recommended at that time as well. Regarding the vaccines, over 40,000 doses have been administered to date to persons who live in Amador County. That's 1,100 more doses than at my last report 2 weeks ago. 56.1% of Amador residents over the age of 12 who are eligible to be vaccinated are now fully vaccinated, and over 3,000 more are partially vaccinated. And it is important to complete that second dose of a 2-dose primary series to have more protection, especially against variant strains like Delta. The priority remains completing a primary series of COVID vaccination for those who remain unvaccinated. That said, we have started our rollout of the vaccine boosters. The Pfizer COVID booster vaccine is available, recommended to be given 6 months or later following the primary series for certain individuals. The COVID-19 booster doses are meant to boost immunity that may have waned over time and are the same dose of vaccine that were given as part of the primary series. People who were previously vaccinated with Pfizer who should, which is the strongest recommendation to receive a booster, include those aged 65 and older, long-term care residents, and people who are age 50 through 64 with underlying medical conditions that place them at higher risk for complex COVID-19. People who may receive a booster include anyone 18 through 49 with underlying medical conditions, and those 18 through 64 who are at increased risk of exposure to COVID-19 due to their occupation or institutional setting. Those who received Moderna and J&J are not yet authorized to get booster doses. The FDA will be meeting at the end of this week, and then the CDC advisory panel next week to review the data and make recommendations for each of those vaccines. They also plan to review the available data on using a booster of a different vaccine than the one used for the person's primary series, or a mix and match type booster strategy. Amador County Public Health began administering Pfizer booster doses on October 1st with clinics at the Health and Human Services Building, Suite 500 at the back entrance on Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Those who want to schedule an appointment for our booster dose clinics may visit myturn.ca.gov to do so. If you have trouble with the website, we will accept walk-ins to get a booster dose, but please arrive before 5:30 in the afternoon so that you can complete the registration, get your dose, and be observed and hopefully out of the clinic by 6. Please bring your vaccination card or a digital vaccine verification or a photo of your vaccination card showing the dates of your previous Pfizer doses when you come to get your booster. The Public Health COVID-19 mobile vaccination team continues to do pop-up clinics that are walk-in clinics offering the Johnson & Johnson, Moderna for age 18 plus, and then Pfizer vaccines for those 12 and over, as long as they have assigned parental or guardian consent. These pop-up walk-in clinics are for the primary vaccine series only. We are not providing booster doses at those clinics. There is one tomorrow, October 13th, at the Fiddletown Community Center between 9 and noon, and on Thursday, October 14th at Sierra Wind on Argonaut Lane in Jackson from 9 a.m. to noon. Homebound individuals may continue to call to schedule a nurse home visit to be vaccinated, calling the public health main number 209-223-6407. Back when we were first administering COVID vaccines, some may remember that we always would ask if you had any other vaccine within 2 weeks. Back then, we were really trying to collect information about what the potential side effect profile of the vaccines might be, and also just try and not complicate the picture of what the rollout was looking like. At this point, it's determined to be safe, and you may get COVID vaccines without regards to a minimum time interval between other vaccines. So there's no minimum waiting period, for example, between your COVID vaccine and a flu shot. You could actually get them on the same day if you chose to at the same visit. Speaking of flu shots, October is a good month to get your flu shot. Public Health will be holding a drive-through flu shot clinic on Saturday, October 23rd from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. at the Church of the Nazarene off Ridge Road in Sutter Creek. And we're really grateful to the Church of Nazarene for agreeing to host this clinic for the second year in a row. Flu mist and regular dose flu shots will be available, but no high dose flu shots, and we will not be giving COVID vaccine at the flu shot drive-in clinic. There's no minimum waiting period between the flu shot and other vaccines, and persons that received monoclonal antibodies for COVID do not need to wait to get their flu shot. However, I meant to mention this a little before. If you've received monoclonal antibodies for treatment of COVID, you need to wait 90 days after that infusion before you can get a COVID vaccine. That's the one waiting period that still remains in place. Switching topics. Amador County's Public Health's COVID case investigation and contact tracing unit began using the CalConnect software platform last Monday, October 4th. CalConnect reaches out to those who test positive via a text message. It comes from the number 233-93, and that provides a link to a secure portal that collects information and provides instruction for self-isolation to the case and quarantine for their close contacts. Contact tracers still attempt to call those individuals who cannot receive text messages or who have questions or who don't respond to the virtual assistant. The testing site, the OptumServe testing site at the Health and Human Services building off Lower Ridge Road was closed yesterday in observance of the holiday, but there's a makeup day today. They'll be open until 7. They're also open this week, Wednesday and Saturday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And next week, the no-cost testing will resume on the usual schedule of Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday with hours of 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Go to the back entrance at the Health and Human Service building, and the staff will direct you to the testing area in Suite 500. Masks are required to be worn. Results are available within 3 days, and we request that you please register online at lhi.care, or if you have trouble accessing the internet, you may call 1-888-634-1123 to register. As available, those with appointments are prioritized, but as available, walk-ins will be accommodated as space allows. I would like to thank everyone who continues their diligent work on the front lines to protect our community as Amador County confronts COVID-19, including hospital and healthcare workers, first responders, school staff, and administrators. I am especially grateful to the public health staff who have been working 7 days a week on COVID issues. In conclusion, anyone who feels ill, even with mild symptoms, should get tested and stay home while awaiting the results. Answer the message or call from public health if you test positive so that we can assist you and your loved ones. And if you don't feel great, please isolate. Are there any questions that I could address at this time?
Board, any questions?
I have a question. I had a couple things sent to me. One I talked about at a previous meeting, and I got a little more information on it.
Okay.
And this was Jeannie Deaver. Here's what she wrote me. My relative, an 18-year-old female athlete, won a scholarship to the University of Hawaii to play basketball. She had played all through high school and on traveling teams throughout up to Western states. She was strong and in perfect health. Her parents did not want her to get the COVID shot. Her coach told her she had to have it or she could not play. She said, okay, was given the vaccine. Her parents had gone over to get her moved in and had not left yet. Her dad went to her basketball practice the next day. He thought she was acting wrong and went down to check on her on the court. She was freezing and shivering. He rushed her in his vehicle to an emergency room near the university. They rushed her in, put her on a table, and had to use paddles on her. Her heart was stopping. She spent 30 hours in the emergency room and 2 days in the hospital. If her dad had not been there and seen what was happening, she had died in that basketball court. And on a phone conversation I have with Jeannie, they would not put down that it was a vaccine, caused the vaccine. I have a question about that. And I was talking to a gentleman yesterday. I guess he doesn't want his brother's name put out there, but this is what he wrote me, to whom this may concern. I'm writing this about my brother. He was a healthy 39-year-old that has had his second round of Moderna vaccine roughly 2.5 to 3 weeks before he collapsed at work. The ER doctor said he died before he hit the ground. When his autopsy is done, they found signs of myocarditis, inflammation around the heart. As the autopsy death certificate states, sudden cardiac event. I asked about this and was told they wouldn't report a possible COVID vaccine side effect death. I cannot say for sure it's from the COVID jab, but direct from the CDC website, Moderna website, they state about myocarditis.
Mm-hmm.
I myself feel that he was a very healthy person, that there's more to this. My question is, I think VERS will report issues.
Yes.
Is there a way to go in there and track to even see, can a doctor see if these people show up as a possible effect from the vaccines? Is there a way to track? Are these type of cases being put down? Are they just kind of filtering through?
The whoever's treating that individual, if there's any potential connection to vaccine, it should be reported to VERS. So if a doctor in a primary care office, an urgent care clinic, an emergency room sees a patient who says, I was vaccinated within the last 3 days, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever it was, whatever time interval, and they believe that there's any possibility that it even could be related. The VERS reporting system is not intended to say, I've made the determination that it's related. It's just this needs to be looked into report. And so they are asked to provide, of course, the date of the vaccination, which vaccination anyone got. And this is not only for COVID vaccinations, but for any vaccination. And then what do you see the person in front of you showing? Is it a heart problem or is it something else? And then they ask for things like laboratory results from blood tests or x-rays that were taken, any consultations like a heart specialist and what their findings were. And basically it's a way to report the possibility of a connection of an event into the system. And then a team of researchers takes those, filters them, prioritizes them, and certainly digs into anything that looks like a suspicious event.
Okay, but my question is this, and maybe under HIPAA they can't. Is there a way to basically track to say, does that person's number show up, that person's name show up as having a possible side effect?
So the physician who reported it would have, or a clinician, because it could be a nurse or it could be a mid-level provider as well, has access to show the report and track the outcome of the report over time. And I would have to look into whether the individual who the report was filed about also has access to it. I believe they would. Certainly they would have to sign some forms to prove they are who they say they are and have access to their own records, just like you would with your own records in any medical context. But I do not believe that any other member of the public would have access to that type of confidential medical information.
So it would take a doctor, or like that person had where that or existing doctor, or they got a new doctor, they'd have access to it.
That's correct. And the other thing I'm going to research for you, but I believe it doesn't even have to be a doctor to make a report to VERS. If an individual feels like they were adversely affected, they could make a report for themselves they would have to say which doctor was treating them so that those records of the lab reports and all the other things could be collected from the medical record. But anyone can initiate a VAERS report.
Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board questions or comments? So just for the record, Dr. Kerr, and this is kind of a generalization, but since the vaccines have been out, about 100,000 people have died, and most of those that have died have been unvaccinated. Is that a correct statement?
Are you talking about nationwide?
Yeah.
So the 100,000 increase has occurred since the Delta surge began. So since
so
the vaccines
have
have
actually been out even longer.
Yes,
Okay, so about 100,000 people have died, and most of them were unvaccinated, correct?
that is correct.
Okay, and as to your knowledge, we've worldwide probably given this vaccine at least to 1 billion people, maybe 2 billion people already.
It's been a lot, yes.
And the number of adverse side effects is pretty minimal, right?
It is considered absolutely to be safer than getting COVID for sure. And yes, the
Yeah.
side effect profile in general, myocarditis is a recognized possibility after vaccination, particularly in the young adult male population. Those episodes of myocarditis tend to be self-limited, and the vast majority of them recover. COVID itself, the infection itself, can also cause myocarditis. That's the reason that early on, some of the college athletic programs were actually doing heart MRI studies on every athlete before they would return them to competition. So both the virus itself can cause myocarditis. That tends to be a more serious case of myocarditis than what can happen after the vaccine administration.
And most people in that category, they're kind of warned about this, or to look out for these kinds of symptoms.
Yes, so the information sheet that everyone gets whenever they get a vaccine lists all of these symptoms. And for the 2 mRNA-based vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, that is considered a extra warning for that population. And then the J&J, you may recall back in April, had a brief pause put on it for a couple of weeks to alert everyone about the possibility of this vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenia condition. And particularly wanted to alert clinicians not to use heparin to treat it if it occurred. And that one tends to occur in women of reproductive age. And so if someone has the option of taking the other vaccine, then that may be way into their decision.
Thank you.
One question.
Yes, Supervisor Forrester.
Morning, Dr. Kerr, the Supervisor Forrester.
Morning.
On vaccinations of children, it sounds like there's going to be a mandate by the first of the year for children under 11 and under to be vaccinated.
The mandate,
they're trying to make it sound like this is no different than any other vaccine that the kids would be vaccinated with, but kids are not required to get a vaccination for the flu and things like that. And the symptoms that kids 11 and under have for COVID are relatively minor, and they recover very quickly, at least from what I've seen and heard and read. So can you just give me your opinion on that?
Okay, so first of all, the timing on that mandate will be contingent on full approval, not emergency use authorization, but full approval of the vaccine for that age group. And
full approval from who? From the CDC or from the administration?
From the FDA.
Okay.
So at this point, the only vaccine that has full approval is the Pfizer vaccine, and they use the brand name Comirnaty when they went for their full approval. And that is not yet even in the 12 to 16-year-olds. That's 16 and up. So at this point, the other vaccines, Moderna and J&J and the Pfizer in the younger age groups are all still being administered under emergency use authorization. And the mandate that is happening in California for school age kids will not happen until full approval by the FDA. So that is months away. The earliest it could be would be January or potentially in July of next year. The follow-up question is about the reason for COVID vaccination versus flu vaccination. You are correct that most children who get COVID do pretty well, have mild symptoms and recover completely. There is certainly the possibility of the MIS-C, the multi-system inflammatory syndrome related to COVID that happens in children and young adults. Rarely, but it is a much more serious condition, usually requiring hospitalization in an intensive care unit. And the rate of that condition has certainly gone up in these past months, while the Delta surge has started to impact children more than the previous strains of the virus did. The other thing to consider is that in order to achieve adequate immunity in the community to halt the spread of this virus and its variants that continue to emerge, we need to get a significant, higher than we have, proportion of our population immune to this virus. And the effort to get the younger population vaccinated is part of that, achieving us staying ahead of this virus and the variants that emerge.
Okay, just for example, Ione Elementary has had a huge influx of cases of COVID, and to the point that the administration is teaching because teachers have been out. But you know, so many kids are getting it. Doesn't that build up resistance then within those children that have contracted COVID?
There is certainly immunity that lasts for a while, and it's still being studied how long it lasts. And part of what seems to inform how much immunity you get is how serious your case was the first time you had it. So definitely, as the rate in children's going up, we're of course going to be following those kids out over time. A select population of them will be asked to be in studies to check for, you know, their antibody levels at, you know, a few weeks after infection versus a month after infection versus several months after infection. And the science and the data is continuing to emerge about that type of immunity.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Crew.
Dr. Kerr, good morning. Supervisor Crew, a question on the booster. I know you said it's available at the Health and Human Services building.
Yes.
What about our homebound folks that are definitely probably need to take that booster?
Right.
Do we offer that yet, or is that down the road a little ways?
If they received Pfizer, then we can offer them a Pfizer booster. If they received Moderna or Johnson & Johnson, we're going to have to wait for the authorization for that, which we expect to be coming probably the week of sometime October 20th or later, because the 20th, I believe, is the date the committee's meeting to make the official recommendation for that. I know that we accommodated quite a few people who were, you know, relatively homebound by doing it as the drive-through clinic. We're going to have to explore those possibilities again. And then also our mobile team, timing wise, as far as getting those boosters rolled out to those people who have mobility issues.
So they would call public health if they wanted, just like they would for a regular, for the booster.
Just like they would for a regular
available.
home. Correct, the 223-6407 number.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other board questions or comments? Any comment from the public here in the audience?
I had one more question.
Okay.
In your report, you said 89% are unvaccinated of 137 additional COVID cases in the county.
Last week.
When you say unvaccinated, does that include people that have received like the first shot out of a 2-shot series?
In general, most of the people of that 89% had no vaccine. There may have been one or two that I recall over the last week who had a dose either within a few days before, or sometimes people, got exposed and they go out and get a dose of vaccine hoping that it'll be like post-exposure prophylaxis. Unfortunately, the COVID vaccine has not proven to be effective used that way, but we have seen that sometimes where somebody got exposed by a friend or a family member and they went and got a dose of vaccine, but it hasn't had enough time to create antibodies yet. So the definition we use there is the fully vaccinated definition, which means they're 2 weeks after their second dose or 2 weeks after their J&J.
Okay, so pretty much whoever's unvaccinated, most of those had no shots in.
The vast majority
yeah.
had no shots.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there any Zoomers or anything? Okay. Okay, Dr. Kerr, I want to thank you and all of your staff for everything you're doing. Thanks for this informative update, and keep up the good work. We really appreciate everything you're doing.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Okay, so next on the agenda is a resolution honoring the efforts of state, federal, and local first responders and Amador County Resources and Amador County volunteer organizations during the Caldor fire. And this is a resolution I put together just to acknowledge the efforts that went on behind the scenes to keep fire out of Amador County for the most part. I did sneak in up by Kirkwood, and I went up there several times and saw the effects there. And but fortunately, it did not damage any of the houses in the area. They were all saved, and some of the areas where the fire may be still burning are just so rugged that you just can't get any crews in there. I saw helicopters dropping water on that. So I'd like to go ahead and read the resolution of the record. That's okay. So whereas the Caldor fire started on August 14th, 2021 in El Dorado County, about 2 miles east of Omo Ranch and 4 miles south of Grizzly Flat, it initially burned slowly but exploded in size on the night of August 16th due to high winds and began to threaten communities in Amador County where evacuation advisories were made. The fire raged to the northeast and burned over 220,000 acres, eventually reaching the Lake Tahoe Basin near the city of South Lake Tahoe. The fire also reached and threatened both the Kirkwood Valley and Silver Lake areas. The fire has destroyed at this point 782 homes, 81 structures have been damaged, and fortunately, no deaths have occurred. Whereas a unified command between CAL FIRE, Amador, El Dorado Unit, and El Dorado National Forest was established to combat the Caldor fire from its early onset to its ultimate extinguishment. Just being optimistic here. The command structure recruited and managed firefighting resources from around the state, the various surrounding communities, and beyond to bring an adequate firefighting response to bear on this fire. Whereas the Amador County Office of Emergency Services immediately sprang into action by providing evacuation warnings to residents of Amador County and later evacuation orders to residents. OES established evacuation centers at the Amador County Fairgrounds in Plymouth, which included evacuation facilities for large animals with the help of the Amador County Animal Rescue Team, or ACART, and the Lawton Ranch in Jackson. Whereas the Amador County Sheriff's Office maintained road closures and kept close watch over property in and around areas of the evacuation. Whereas additional county resources supported the efforts of OES by providing mapping of the Caldor fire in real time that was made available to the public. Whereas the Amador County Fire Protection District sent a series of strike teams out to the Caldor fire as well as to the Dixie fire prior to the ignition of the Caldor fire. Whereas other departments within Amador County participated in the Dixie fire and monument fires, and then responded to the Caldor fire. And all departments, Ione Fire, Jackson Fire, Jackson Valley Fire, Sutter Creek Fire, Lockwood Fire, and Mule Creek Fire responded units to the Caldor fire, and we're also covering CAL FIRE stations and responded to the fires in Sonora, and at the same time continued to keep our county safe from fires, in particular the Liberty Fire in the Fiddletown area. And whereas the first responders and resources that were brought to bear on this conflagration kept Amador County residents safe and prevented any structures from being destroyed by the flames. Now, therefore, be it resolved, the Amador County Board of Supervisors wishes to express the gratitude to the firefighters, first responders, county staff, and local volunteer organizations for their efforts in keeping Amador County residents safe and protecting their property during this harrowing ordeal of the Caldor fire. Okay. So, board questions or comments? I incorporated some of the changes that Supervisor Forrester brought to me.
Well done.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it looks pretty good to me. One thing I will say, that the Liberty fire could have been a really nasty fire, and I think CAL FIRE and the local resources jumped on it pretty quick, so I thank them for that. I saw some of our, I'd also like to thank some of our neighboring El Dorado residents that brought over their old non-carb compliant water trucks, so I'm glad they were there, and I won't say their names, or the truck police might come and make them get rid of their old trucks that did a good job. But yeah, that was that fire could have been really ugly, and so it's good they got it on it hard and kept it small. Yeah, so it's a nice resolution. Looks good.
Thank you.
Only thing I would bring up is I sent you the correspondence from Chief Ken Mackey from Ione, and
Correct.
the one thing he did say is other departments within Amador County participated in the Dixie Fire and Monument Fires, and then responded to the Caldor Fire, and all departments, Ione, Jackson, Sutter Creek, Lockwood, and he said Mule Creek Fire, which would be the prison crew from their responded units to the Caldor Fire, and we're also covering CAL FIRE stations and responded to fires in Sonora. So I just don't want to leave anybody out.
I put all that in. So that's not in your copy, but it's in the revised copy I sent to the board clerk.
Right, okay.
On Thursday or Friday, and then she handed me a fresh copy.
Okay,
Or
thank you.
Chuck did. So, is there any comment from the audience? We'll hear more from our CAL FIRE friends in AFPD later, but any Zoomers? Okay, I'll bring it back to the board. Okay.
I'll move to approve it. Second.
So we have a motion from Supervisor Brown, second from Supervisor Neto to approve the resolution, and there are a few just minor changes. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay. Moving on to item 4C, this is the Caldor Fire update. And with us, we have Mike Blankenheim and Tom Tinsley from CAL FIRE, and you're the section chief. Mike, do you want to come up and give us an update there? And then we have someone from the U.S. Forest Service as well.
Jeff Marsalis.
Right, Jeff Marsalis, and then
I always say it wrong.
Chief White.
Marsalis.
okay.
And Chief White.
Okay, so good morning. So Mike Blankenheim, Unit Chief for the CAL FIRE Amador El Dorado Unit, and Jeff Marsalis is the Forest Supervisor from the El Dorado National Forest. I think you guys know Walt White, the Chief of the Amador Fire Protection District, and then Tom Tinsley is the Unit Forester back there if we get into some of those discussions a little bit later on. So a quick update on the CAL FIRE, then I've just got a few things I'd like to say about how the fire was ran and some of the successes and probably more importantly, some of the challenges we had. And then I'll turn it over to Chief White and Supervisor Marshall for a quick update on their piece of it as well. So as it stands this morning, 221,827 acres and 98% contained. So we are on the tail end of the suppression part of this. The vast majority of the work left is in fire suppression repair and forest restoration and all of those kind of things that are be ongoing for a very long period of time from here on out. But the suppression side of things is really starting to wind down. As far as the suppression repair goes on the state responsibility areas, that means where we're repairing dozer lines and hand lines and damage we caused while putting the fire out. We've completed that part of it for the state responsibility area. There's quite a bit left on the federal responsibility area, just by the mere fact that they had the vast majority of acres of this fire were in the federal responsibility area. But I think Supervisor Marshall can speak to that in a few minutes here. So just kind of an overview of how the fire went from my perspective. So I'm going to go back a little bit about 8 or 9, 10 months ago. When I got the job in Amador, El Dorado here as the chief of the Amador, El Dorado unit, one of the first meetings I had was with Supervisor Marshall, who had been in his position for a few months of that time. I had known Jeff a little bit from prior working relationships and that kind of thing, but this is the first opportunity we had to actually come together as a partnership. And that initial conversation was a fairly easy conversation for me, and that was refreshing to see. And something we agreed on very early was just given the history of fire season in California over the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years and the scope of the scale of the fires we're seeing and the frequency and that kind of thing, that no one agency is going to be able to handle all these issues by themselves. And with that, together is better for the fire protection in both Amador County, El Dorado County, and the areas we serve. So we had a gentleman's handshake agreement early on that, we're not changing policies, we're not changing procedures, we're not doing any of those kind of things, we're not giving up jurisdictions and authorities, but a very strong agreement that we were going to take a very cooperative approach to fire protection, at least in the wildland arena in the counties that we serve here. And that was definitely put to the test when the Caldor fire started, without a question. One of the most impactful events El Dorado County has ever seen, certainly the most impactful event I think the forest has ever seen, and then the threats to everybody around it, to the impact to Amador County, the threat to Alpine County and all the surrounding areas. So not a small event. So as you said in the resolution, the fire started on August 14th in the federal DPA in the Sopiago Creek area, just a little bit north and east of Omo Ranch. Very much so threatening the state DPA right out of the gate there. So the two agencies went into unified command on Sunday, the 15th, and we were in unified command for, I think, 32 or 33 days. Got out of unified command on September 17th as the containment went up, and we, for business reasons, kind of, probably not the right way to say it, but went our separate ways and handling the rest of the business left, which most of it was fire suppression, repair, stuff of it. So what we mean by unified command, what I mean by unified command, we've done this before as agencies where we call it unified command, where there's a fire that's either burning in or threatening both of our jurisdictions. And what it's looked like in the past is both agencies show up, we draw the line in the sand where the jurisdictional line is, I take my part, they take their part. We try to come together on a few things where we can, but it's more along the lines, meet the definition of more of like what a parallel command would be, not necessarily a unified command. This fire didn't allow for that. The burning intensity was too much, the fuel conditions were such, and the threats to communities, infrastructure, private timberlands, and all those kind of things as such, where again, on day one, we made we reaffirmed the decision we had talked about very early on when we first got in these jobs, is this is going to be a truly cooperative approach, and the decisions we're going to make together, and they're going to be based on public safety, operational efficiency, and all those kind of things, not jurisdictional and not financial. So a unified command in the sense that as we work together on this, our decision-making process was going to be geared towards public service, public safety, and putting the fire out. And I think we were able to maintain that over the course of the fire. It did not come without challenges by any stretch of the imagination. It took effort to do that, but I think successful in that. Not to understate this part of it, but that same cooperative approach was taken with local agencies from both Amador and El Dorado County, the law enforcement agencies, the private industries, the infrastructure, the utilities, and those kind of things. They were stakeholders, not necessarily cooperators in the event, but very much wanted to bring them into the fold early on to make sure issues were addressed and met early on as best we could. And I think we were fairly successful with that. Right out of the gate, burned relatively mildly for a day or two, and then I think on August 16th, I think that was described well in the in the resolution. The Caldor fire became the Caldor fire on August 16th. It went from 1,300 acres or so to probably roughly 10,000 acres and destroyed the community of Grizzly Flat. In that same time frame, the threats to Pollock Pine, Sierra Springs, Mount Auckham, and all those areas around Highway 50 forced the evacuation of our headquarters building, of his Placerville Ranger District Office building, and the ECC, ECC was in the middle of the evacuation zone. We enacted our COOP plan, which is our continuity of operations plan, which involves setting up at the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office in their new building there, with the communications van and all that kind of stuff. We set that up, but thankfully we did not have to pull the trigger and actually move out of our ECC building. That would have been a game changer for us. But all those things were occurring kind of simultaneously in this first couple of days of the fire. That same cooperative approach, that same focus on doing the right thing for the operation, for public safety and all those kind of things was very much true when we established the East Zone. When the fire got established in the community of Strawberry and Highway 50, that was a decision point Jeff and I had talked about, that when that fire was established there, we were really gonna have to look at some organizational change to deal with the, at that point in time, the actual real threat to the Tahoe Basin. We ordered a second incident management team that came from the United States Forest Service and created an East Zone and gave that team the responsibility for managing a piece of that fire on the east side. But again, we didn't draw a line along a jurisdictional boundary with the TMU or the ENF or AEU. The line we drew and gave them their sphere of influence was based on operational and logistical efficiency. So again, stayed away from the jurisdictional piece of it and those kind of things. Again, focusing on what was important for us on this one, which was the public safety part of it. And again, didn't come without challenges, but those challenges and the work that created were well worth the result we got out of this. Okay, so successes we had. I think I've hit the first one a couple of times now, and that is the truly cooperative approach that we took on this. I think without that, I don't know that we would have had the successful outcome that we had on this fire. And when I talk about a successful outcome, and we still burned 220,000 acres, we still lost almost 800 homes and over 1,000 buildings, you know, a couple of fire stations, a post office, a school, and all those kind of things. But the impacts without a truly cooperative, professional, efficient, aggressive approach to the firefighting, I think would have been significantly worse. And I'll get to that in a minute there when we talk about the actual firefighting around Sly Park and Mount Auckham and some of those areas in there. The potential for so much more destruction in communities, private timberland infrastructure, and that kind of thing was high, and we were able to navigate some of that and lessen those impacts by some of those approaches we took. So I know I've said that a bunch of times right now, but I don't think I can overstate how important that was for the successful mitigation on this. It was all agencies, state, local, and federal, coming together for a common outcome on this. And I'll go back to that again, but I can't overstate that. With that cooperative approach, what it allowed us to do was take individual policies, procedures, strengths, weaknesses from all of our various agencies, and we come into unified command, all those come into the pot together. So that allowed us to pick and choose which agency policy, which agency procedure, which resource order was more efficient for what we needed to do that day, and we could leverage that from the individual agencies. So we weren't locked into a CAL FIRE only way of doing things, or a Forest Service only way of doing things, or a local agency only way of doing things. We had options to pick from different policies and procedures. And again, it took work, but again, I think it led to that successful outcome. Operational excellence is another success there. We know what happened in the basin was highly publicized and televised, and that's what got the political attention and the news attention and all this kind of thing. So that part is well documented on what happened on the 10,000 acres in the Tahoe Basin. And I don't want to downplay that at all. The firefighting there was just as good as anywhere else on this fire. There's a reason we didn't lose a single piece of infrastructure once that came over Echo Summit. We lost a lot of cabins on the west side of Echo Summit, but again, quality, aggressive, initial attack kind of tactics in the Tahoe Basin with bulldozers, hand crews, fire engines, and aircraft. Kept that up on the hillside to the south of town, and we didn't lose any infrastructure. So again, I don't want to downplay that at all. But the firefighting that went along in Sly Park and Sierra Springs and Mount Auckham and Omo Ranch and all those areas in there, some of the best that I've ever been a part of in my career. And if you go out there and you get to see the ground where we were fighting fire out there in some of those areas, there's hand line and bulldozer line literally through people's backyards where we're moving swing sets out of the way to put hand line in, fire off, and those kind of things. So labor intensive for sure, coordination intensive for sure, but again, in the grand scheme of things, infinitely worth the effort it took, and I'm probably more proud of that operation than anything I've been a part of in my career. Some of the other operational successes, the piece of line that went from Omo Ranch along Plummer Ridge going south and east towards Highway 88. Early on in the incident, really having to prioritize where we could put resources and where we couldn't. The resources were prioritized to the population-heavy parts of this thing, so that piece along Plummer Ridge had very, very few resources. A lot of hired equipment and a few pieces of line supervision, mostly from the U.S. Forest Service, and that is the piece of line that, when that was cut in and finally burned out a week or two into it, that was the piece that took most of Amador County out of play. That stopped that advancement, or any chance of advancement in that fire coming from east to west back towards Amador County. So that one doesn't get any kind of attention, but if you ever have a chance to go out there and see the line that was put in, I recommend you doing that because it's impressive. We talked about the basin, and then the piece that was mentioned in the resolution again around Caples Lake and Kirkwood. I'll say this about that piece. That was just sheer effort. I think you guys know the terrain up there. You know the fuel conditions. You know the ground up there. There was nothing finesse about that. That was just will and determination with the firefighters and the equipment operators to get those lines put in and that kind of thing. And it took us a week or better to put line in around a couple thousand acres, which doesn't usually take us that long. So again, I'm very proud of those operations up there. Last but not least on the successes, and I'm sure there's probably plenty more that I've left off here, is the life safety piece and the evacuation part of it. Did not go perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but in the same token, no civilian injuries, no civilian deaths. Everybody was evacuated in a timely fashion, and everybody was repopulated in a coordinated and timely fashion. And that's credit to, you know, the many different law enforcement agencies we were working with on this, primarily CHP and the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office, just because they had the brunt of the work there. But that's not to say that the Amador County SO and the CHP out of here were not very much a part of that. And then the mutual aid system for the law enforcement agencies, there was law enforcement from all over the state of California participating in that evacuation plan. So again, one of the successes for me. Moving on to some of the challenges, and this would probably be the end of my part here. Primarily the biggest one, the fuel and the weather conditions. There's no doubt we've been in a drought in California now for the last 9 or 10 years. Significantly over the last year or two, it's gotten worse and worse. And what that's done to fuel moisture in the forests and in the large diameter fuels and that kind of thing is to drop them down to levels that we've never experienced before in California. And the fire behavior we've been seeing this year, not just on Caldor fire, but on fires around the state have been reflective of that. Tactics and strategies we were able to use 5, 6, 7 years ago, for instance, running a fire into the granite areas as a way of controlling it. Those strategy and tactics aren't working anymore. So there was a lot of lines we put in that we had to put line in, we'd lose it, back up, put it in again, back up, put it in again, and just keep going until we get one to hold. And it was labor intensive, but again, the right thing to do because we didn't have a place to draw a big box around this thing and let it get big. There was not a side of this fire that wasn't surrounded by a community or timberland or infrastructure or anything like that. So we didn't have room to let this thing grow. So those efforts were very much worth it. With the fuel and the weather conditions, we had problems with this before, but I don't think I've ever seen anything like this before until we got to this fire here. But the spotting coming out of the convective column, meaning this fire wasn't necessarily a wind-driven fire. There was a couple of windy days that really advanced the fire, but most of the fire spread was slope-driven and spot-driven, meaning that the hot embers, burning pieces of material, were going straight up in the air with the convective column. And as they fall out, you don't know which way they're going to fall out. And where they land, the fuels were so dry and so receptive, almost 100% of those pieces of wood falling out of that column were starting fires ahead of the main fire. Huge challenge for us, and that was part of the reason we have to keep reestablishing lines. I think fuel accumulation, I think that is part of this conversation as well, but the fuel accumulation wouldn't be the factor it is if we didn't have the crazy dry conditions that we're experiencing right now. Lack of resources. As I mentioned in the resolution, there were several other large fires going on in the state of California, mostly in the northern part of the state, in Shasta County, Tehama County, Siskiyou County, and that kind of thing. And it took us a while to get the number of bodies we needed here to successfully put this out. For a couple of days' time there, we were working with 300 and 400 people. Remember, we had a conversation about 10 or 12 days into this when it's, 30 or 40,000 acres, and we were excited because we had 1,000 people finally, which what we were hoping for was 5,000 or 6,000 people. At the peak of the incident, I think 5,200 was the kind of the peak number we had at the peak of this. And just kind of for reference on that, the King Fire in 2014 had almost 6,000 acres and burned less than 50% of the acres of what the Caldor Fire burned. So getting resources was a challenge for us for sure. Then quite frankly, some of the politics, especially as this thing got more near the Tahoe Basin and the attention grew on it, and some of the political focus, some of that at times was not helpful. I'll be quite honest on that. Then the last thing, and this could go under either one, either under the successes or the challenges part of it, and that is our fuel reduction project we've been working on both with the forest and the unit for the last, I don't know how many decades. The success part of it is this. We used those everywhere we could, and there was no shortage of fuel reduction projects in the footprint of this fire. The fuel reduction projects alone are not enough to stop the fire, pure and simple, more of the shaded fuel break kind of thing. What it did allow us to do is it took time to get the fire out of the crown, slow the spotting down, get the fire back down to a manageable size on the ground where our resources can be effective on it. It gave us anchor points for establishing lines, for doing firing operations, all of those kind of things. So I don't want to downplay the necessity and the success that we had by utilizing existing fuels projects. Many in the basin that Jeff worked on when he was a supervisor in the Tahoe Basin. The FA50 project, I'll kind of use as my example here in a minute when I get to the challenge part of the fuel reduction project. Has been in place for 5 or 6 years now. So there was no shortage of those places where we used existing projects to anchor off of, and that's a good thing. So I guess the challenge part of that is the size and the scope of these projects. When the FA50 project was designed after the King Fire in 2015, it was designed as a landscape size fuel reduction project. It goes all the way from the town of Camino all the way to Echo Summit. So a large scale continuous line of fuel reduction projects over 30 or 40 miles of freeway. On its surface, it sounds like that's a huge, amazing project. This fire went right through that in several different places. Not completely. This is one we used many, many times for those anchor points we established and some of those like we just talked about. But what it opened up my eyes to was something that I considered a landscape size fuel reduction project that was gonna not be the be all end all for projects, but it opened my eyes to what the scale and the scope of these projects needs to be moving forward. And it's the FA50 size project and then some moving on. So, yep, I think that's what I've got this morning. I'm going to turn it over to Chief White for a local government perspective.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairman Axe and members of the board.
Morning.
Yeah, this was definitely a team effort. One of the things that was stressed at the morning briefings every day was one team, one fight. We had multiple different agencies working on this throughout the incident. The impact here locally, fortunately, from a fire loss perspective, was negligible. Other than no structures were lost, but this was the largest fire threatening Amador County since the Butte Fire 6 years ago. Early on, we sent 2 engines, initial attack to Grizzly Flats the night that the fire was exploding. We also, as part of our commitment to the state master mutual aid system, our OES engine was assigned. It moved from the Dixie to the Caldor Fire, where it was on that fire for roughly a month. We had crew swaps on there. It was a combination of supervision between Amador Fire and Folsom Fire. We covered 3/4 of the supervision of that strike team while it was assigned to the Caldor Fire, yet maintained full coverage here at home. Chief, I think, mentioned very well the challenges were the resource drawdown and the extremely low fuel moisture. When I was assigned to the strike team, we were covering the areas of Sly Park initially, and then the Whitehall area along Highway 50. Our strike team, I'm happy to say, was able to pick up a significant spot so that the fire didn't jump Highway 50 in our division. But what was very concerning to me is we were able to protect a number of cabins, and no cabins were lost in our division during our time of assignment. I don't believe any cabins were lost in that division. But even just a backing fire, we would go ring around the trees near the cabins and remove the fuel as it was coming in. You would have a live oak catch fire from a backing fire, because I think the probability of ignition was 9 out of 10, even in heavy timber, and that seems to be pretty uncommon or uncharacteristic. But as the chief had mentioned, you know, the King Fire occurred in that same region 6 years prior, and what was pointed out to me at a morning briefing by Tom Tinsley was at one point we had twice the amount of fire and half the amount of resources. And that's because other large fires working and just the drawdown of the state when it comes to qualified trained firefighters. In our division, I was fortunate during the time I was assigned, my assistant strike team, or my strike team trainee was Clint Madden from Folsom Fire, who was a U.S. Forest Service former hotshot, as well as a smoke jumper with over 100 jumps, also a Class C faller, which enabled us to address a lot of hazard trees in the division to render the area safer for repopulation. All in all, I want to really also recognize and commend Sergeant Jeff Bellotti with the Amador County Sheriff's Department. Early on, I got called by one of the incident PIOs. I believe it was actually on the night of the 13th, because some, well, although well-intentioned, inaccurate information got posted on social media regarding evacuations. So our office and Kayla Dale reached out near immediately, because she also updates our Facebook and our social media notifications to make sure that we were providing accurate official information. We had either a virtual or in-person attendance at cooperator meetings, and we were regular participants in the daily briefings because of being assigned to the fire. I'm honored and humbled to work with these agencies here, and all of them that participated in this firefight. I think that it really speaks well of the Master Mutual Aid System. The ancillary benefit of this fire was that when the Lawrence fire broke out in the Middletown area, that morning I just left the cooperators meeting. I got a phone call from Supervisor Oneto alerting me about the fire in Middletown. Began monitoring the fire and even regrouping my strike team. We were on a rest period. The incident command immediately redirected 2 Type 3 strike teams and 2 helicopters to the Lawrence fire. It was reported at 30 acres and growing. I think it got contained at about 39 acres. Just to let you know the weight of that response, 2 strike teams is 10 engines and somewhere between 30 to 40 firefighters, as well as strike team leaders, 2 additional strike team leaders and trainees. And then the aerial helicopter coverage was extremely valuable. Having not just the water drops, but the aerial observation of the fire and where it's going is very big. So the rapid and weighted response that was possible because of the Caldor made quick work of that fire, and also really helped contain the bridge fire. And during the Caldor incident, there were actually 2 arrests of arsonists made in this county. So all in all, you know, we had significant resources dedicated to it. We had significant integration with multiple agencies, including the Amador County Sheriff's Office, to make sure we were providing accurate official information. And roughly 2/3 of our workforce were on duty, including chief officers, for the majority of the Caldor incident. And I'm happy to report that due to our personnel willing to step up, that we were able to maintain full coverage here in the county. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Chairman Axe, members of the board, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Jeff Marcellet, I'm the forest supervisor for the El Dorado National Forest. And all the fun stories have been told, but maybe I'll provide a little bit more context, and then certainly we can answer questions. Little bit around the time. Nationally, we were in planning level 5, which when nationally we're in planning level 5, there's a body in Idaho, in Boise, Idaho, at our National Incident Command Center that is allocating the resources. And so, and they're allocating them one fire at a time based upon 209 requests that come in the morning. We were setting all-time national records for unable to fill for the amount of fire that was happening in the West, the amount of national incidents that were had incident command teams, and the availability of those resources. We were literally setting all-time records of unable to fill orders out of our what we call the NIC in Idaho. So that was the start of this fire, was when the resource draw was at its very greatest. On the fire itself, it started in, there's a chronology, and I think you've Chief Blankenheim's provided some of the dispatch log records for you to look at. We emptied the shelves of every resource we had. We had tankers on order that dropped until they couldn't fly at night because they were timed out for the availability of light. We had, there was no, many of the resource orders that we would have normally brought in on the second day were unable to fill, but we did actually have a tremendous response with engines from CAL FIRE, local government, and Forest Service. We had extended at least our staffing that night, so we had about half of our engines were on later than they normally are. We normally, kind of by way of how we operate, are off by 6 p.m., but we had extended staffing that night, and so they were all on the initial attack. There were dozers, and then of course we pulled in a lot of the Sierra Pacific Industries equipment that was already working out there and got them on emergency equipment rental agreements and so on and so forth. But at the time, the point I'm trying to make is there was literally the greatest drawdown of resources we've seen in the West ever. And I had the privilege of being up on the Shasta Trinity National Forest for about 5 weeks earlier than when the Caldor fire started. And I, through that, have a new appreciation for the fuels conditions. Both Chief White and Chief Blankenheim talked about the tremendous fuels conditions. On the forest at the time the Caldor incident started, we had been setting all-time records for the fuel conditions, so the worst ever. Normally in a summer, you might have a period of time where it's really hot and it's really dry and it's really windy, and that period of time, with our fuel moisture measurements and so on and so forth, might set a record. We were setting an all-time record for almost 60 days straight before this incident actually started. There was a fuels advisory that had been put out by our national office for California and the Great Basin because of how bad it was. And it's related to this 10-year drought, but it's also the last 2 years. Obviously, last year in California was the largest year we'd ever had in a fire season, a single complex fire, the August fire, over 1 million acres, that had never been done before. The largest fire in California history up until last year was like 420,000 acres. And then August fire last year was almost 1 million acres in size. This year, one continuous fire, Dixie Fire, almost 1 million acres by itself, without having a complex of fires, multiple fires kind of wrapped into a single area. So, we're on a real bad trend, and we saw that with the fire itself. When it was initially reported, it was a couple acres. It was tough access to get into. I know Supervisor Oneto and I, we've talked about how, past practices for logging had opened up roads and made access into the forest easier. And there's no question that's true. But our firefighters had difficulty finding where the fire was. It was reported in a place, and it turned out it wasn't. But by the time everybody got on scene, it was cranking. And by midnight, it was like 40 acres and going. That next morning, we placed a pretty massive order of engines and crews, which we didn't get. The system was stretched as much as it could. We got quite a bit iron in, but not as much as we would have liked. We also, that next morning, had placed an order for a national incident command team, for a federal team, because the fire started on federal DPA. So we expected that, we might be able to get a team in here. We were UTF'd on that order, unable to fill, because of the resource draw that was happening. There was not a single federal incident command team anywhere in the country that was available at the time, and actually for a series of several days, 4 or 5 days, which led to the initial partnership that Chief Blankenheim talked about. It's a little uncommon for a state incident command team to take over a fire that's mainly in a federal DPA, although there was certainly state direct protection area that was threatened. We had a lot of conversation, and we knew we needed to get resources on this. We knew we needed to get a team, and it was a little unconventional, but our partnership and what we stand for meant more to us than being conventional at the time. And so a lot of great conversations happening all the way up to the highest state levels, and we were able to make an order of a state type 1 team to come in with a mainly fed fire, and then try to get our arms around this. And both chiefs talked about, the excellence in firefighting. And there really was excellence in firefighting. A combination, about a weekend, we ordered a national incident command team. So our first chance to get a federal incident command team, we placed that order to complement the CAL FIRE team. And so we had 2 type 1 teams working this fire together. And that's when Chief Blankenheim talked about how we brought our different policies to the table. We had those experts working collectively. And often one agency's policies allowed us to do something that another's might have prohibited. And so we were able to exercise that. And so using the federal and the state incident command teams working in tandem, and they really were in total partnership, looking at the landscape. It was a big running timber fire, but had major threat to communities and economics and business. And so they were working in harmony, and it was really a privilege to see. I'm firmly believe had those 2 teams not been using our policies the way that they were able to, this fire would have been much worse, much worse. And ultimately, we were able to get, big significant resource capability up to 5,200 firefighters at one point, but that wasn't until the Intermountain States fire conditions started to drop, and a little bit in the Great Basin. They got their arms around a couple of other large fires in other places in the country, and then mobilized those resources out here to California where we needed them. So lots going on. I'm sure there's a lot of interest too. I'll mention the closures. I'm sure there's been quite a bit of energy. We put a forest-wide closure over the entire El Dorado National Forest when the fire first started, and that's largely because we saw runs on this fire that we just, we fully thought it was going to jump Highway 50 and run up into the Crystal Basin. It's a miracle our firefighters were able to hold it in the footprint there in that canyon. You all know that canyon. It gets windy every afternoon, and it's real, tight, narrow. It's easy for fires to spot across the river there. And so they did a marvelous job holding it. But we weren't sure how big this fire was going to go. And as Chief Blankenheim mentioned, the spotting distance, a couple miles out in some cases, couple miles out in front of the fire itself. So even some of our largest fuels treatments projects that were done on the ground, when a fire spots over the top of it and then it, catches a spot fire and gets going, there's no fuels treatments on the landscape when it's spotting 2 miles that are going to stop a fire. Now, it's clearly changed the nature of how the fire was fought. And when it got into those fuels treatments areas, the flame lengths dropped from 120, 150 feet down to 10 or 15 feet. And then our firefighters were able to directly engage. So there's a lot of value in our fuels projects. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. But those fuels conditions led us to put a pretty massive closure in place because the sheriffs were already, their arms were full in the terms of evacuating these major communities, and we just didn't have resources to get the public out of the way. So as soon as we felt like we had good, solid containment, we shrank the closure to more or less the Caldor fire footprint, but then we included a couple of places where we thought there was still continued potential for the fire spread. So Kirkwood, as an example, we drew a big line around Kirkwood, largely because there were 2 major uncontained portions of the Caldor incident that still were threatening that area. We were looking out on the horizon, seeing red flag warnings. We also were starting to see some precipitation out there. So, you know, of course, the public came unglued when they thought we were closing the ski area for winter skiing activities. And really, it was just a temporary activity. We have a closure in place that's expected to be here until the spring. But with this latest round of precip and the getting through the red flag warning, I'm expecting to start to shrink some of those other areas that are not directly related to the Caldor footprint. And hopefully places like Kirkwood and others will start to see those lines shrink so that the public knows they're going to be open for skiing this winter time. Last thing I'll talk about is fuels conditions. That's a huge topic, and I think it's a interesting and important point for us to continue our collaboration around. As you know, there's a big bill in Congress, an infrastructure bill that's widely talked about in a lot of different circles. I will just say there is a significant forest health component to that. Lots of funding coming because I think the Congress really recognizes the underfunded nature of forest management and how broken in many ways the system is. You know, we on average on the El Dorado National Forest are doing somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 acres of timber projects, and then another on average 18,000 acres of fuels projects. So, you know, the timber projects are, you know, issuing timber sale contracts and stewardship contracts. Folks are cutting the trees and bringing them to the mill, that sort of thing. The fuels projects are more like hand thinning work and herbicide work and mastication and some prescribed fire. And so we're averaging about 18,000 acres a year on that, and then another, you know, 5,000 to 6,000 acres of the timber side. But it's not enough. It's not enough. And we've been talking about pace and scale for a long time, and there's a lot of pieces to the issues that are constraining us. But looking at this infrastructure bill, if it's to pass, I think there's going to be some real resources to forest management. I know we have Forest Service has a MOU with this board around, you know, kind of getting together and talking about things out in the field. I'd like to, you know, invite us, you know, now that COVID is starting to give us some room to work out, you know, how we get together and how we go out in the field and do those sorts of things. I'd like to invite us to maybe start picking up that MOU again and honoring the commitments we made in there. I know there's a master stewardship agreement with UMRA, and, you know, they'll be a primary player if we get any of this forest money. They'll be a primary player we'll be continuing to work with to try to, you know, improve the pace and scale. But the conditions of the forest after 10 years of drought, with the last 2 years being the worst periods of time, it really has reframed a lot of what I know is forest management, what my whole career has been made to, you know, to think about forest management and the real threat that exists to the community. So I will say I was evacuated myself. So for the residents of Amador County who had to flee, I know what that feels like. My heart goes out to you because, you know, there's always things that happen in that, whether you're injured or killed. You know, we measure like, okay, it was successful because, but the truth is it's an impact to people. It's hard. It's hard to leave your home and not know what you're coming back to. So I just want to offer that to your residents here. I know what that feels like personally, and just, you know, you know, we're making commitments to try to do better around forest management in the future, and welcome questions and comments from the board or any friendly amendments from my partners here.
Okay, well, I'll open it up to the board for questions and comments. Supervisor Brown.
Yes, this will be towards CAL FIRE. There was a 60 Minutes thing about the Coastline helicopters out of LA, Orange County, and Ventura County. I was able to talk with the staff of those helicopters, and what was put in that 60 Minutes, I watched in person of how that system broke down. Is there any way we're going to get that fixed? You know, unfortunately, something like this happens again where that needs to be brought in, where CAL FIRE, because one of the things that I watched personally was the team wanted to use it as individual helicopters instead of a team as they were built and as they flew. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can speak to that real quick. So some of the issues that were brought forward in that 60 minutes piece, the big one being for me, the qualifications piece that they talked about on there. And your question is there a resolution on some of those things moving forward? And I think one of the unfortunate things about that 60 minutes piece, and they did not address this at all, those things were addressed on the incident. Those things were handled. When that platform, that package showed up here, there was some qualification discrepancies, and that doesn't mean that those guys were not qualified, were not capable, were not excellent pilots, or any of those kind of things. It has to do with where their qualifications came from versus the standard that the CAL FIRE can accept and what the U.S. Forest Service can accept. Much like, you know, if you come to California, you've got a Nevada commercial license, it doesn't mean you don't know how to drive a truck. It just means when you get to California, you've got to get the California driver's license. It's not a referendum on their skill level or any of those kind of things. So there was an expectation from that group showing up that we were just going to accept their qualifications, and that's not the case. So we committed one of our incident commanders, and then the head of our aviation management for CAL FIRE, who works in Sacramento, who worked probably almost 72 hours on getting that bridge built to get their qualifications accepted. So that part has been rectified and worked out, and it's unfortunate. That piece that showed up on national television was a very one-sided piece and didn't address some of those side of things.
It was just a one-sided in that aspect, and I understand that. I've worked enough with the Forest Service to understand all the qualifications that are needed.
Amen. Yeah.
But the problem with the second part of it, it was even after all that had been completed and they were able to fly out there, a lot of times the team wanted, the incident management team wanted to break that team up. You know, they flew as a team, as their own control aircraft, as their own component. And I've talked to Chief Ike numerous times about this because I was getting calls from the person in charge of it, and as far as communication, and that whole system was, as I saw it, a total breakdown of operations. You know, as far as how the team was being used, when the team could be used. You know, the team sat on the quick reaction force sat on the ground more time than they were in the air.
So yeah, so much like the qualifications piece of that thing. So this is a new resource for us for CAL FIRE.
I understand.
This is not one that we have used before. This was the first time that package of resources has been deployed on an incident that we've been in charge of. So they're not going to lie about this. There was definitely a learning curve on what to do with them and how to use them. Night flying capabilities, as they talked about in the 60-minute piece, are phenomenal. That's something that we've never had before with our fixed wing or rotor wing aircraft. So it's very, very new for us as an agency, and I believe probably very new for the Forest Service as well. I know they've been using that platform down in the Southern California area at a local level for a piece of time now, a year or two or 3 years or something along those lines. So, you know, without sugarcoating this, I'll chalk some of that up to some of our inexperience with how to utilize that resource.
Well,
but again,
to add on to that is you guys are advertising your Firehawks as you're going to be doing night systems here in the near future. So I would think that education should be in the system already, you know, so that you can use it properly, you know.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily the when or the where. You bring up a good point on our CAL Firehawks, is those at some point in time in the next couple of years will have night flying capability. The machine is capable of doing it now. It's building our safety redundancies into it, our qualification systems, and all those kind of things that go with adding an aviation program, adding a component to an aviation program. But again, the CAL Firehawk comes as a single resource, a single increment thing. That's what we know how to use. We don't know yet how to use that package that showed up, and I think that's what you're referring to.
Right, and that's what I'm looking for, you know, because this is going to happen again.
100%.
And so I'm looking for myself is that, these are, as I want to call them, the Marines, you know, coming in to be first reaction to hit things hot and hard. And, you know, you don't put the Army in with the Marines to work together. It just.
I got to address one more thing on that too, though. Sure. I am not at all going to disagree with there could have been some way better efficiencies on the qualifications and the use and some of the, like I said, there's a learning curve that comes with a new resource on there too. but I don't know what the number is, but a significant portion of the time that they were on the ground didn't come from us. It came from their AirTac group supervisor validating the conditions and saying, these conditions don't meet our own protocols, we're not flying. And that hasn't come out either. But there was a high number of times where they sat on the ground where that came from their own built-in safety net, their own precautions, their own protocols, their own policies. I want to.
And I know there were some wind days, and you know, I understand that, but there was quite a bit of time that they should have been allowed to fly. That
Understood.
they weren't used, that I think, you know, was my own personal opinion, that they should have been allowed to fly a little bit more. One other thing I'd like to add on to this, the CHP closure ahead of schedule of the team of 88, you guys had put out a requirement, as the team had put out a requirement to close 88 at a specific time. CHP proceeded to close it earlier than the prescribed time, as we were going to put it out in a joint notice. And that was kind of disconcerting, and CHP is definitely standing behind their plan, saying it was, even though the fire wasn't that close, it was coming close to 88, but it hadn't gotten to that. It was another 2 or 3 more days before it got to that point. Is there another thought about keeping coordinated a little bit better road closure capability?
So short answer is yes. I don't know that I can speak to the specifics as to the rationale for CHP to take that move, make that move that they made. I have not had a conversation with them, so
Okay.
I don't want to pretend to speak for their motivations behind that. But you were intimately involved with the base camp operations and the cooperators meetings and what went into the evacuation planning and all those kind of things. So I would hope that you've got a good sense of the level of coordination we at least strived for in getting those things done. And there are things that may not have gone smooth and may not have gone perfect, and I think that is probably one of those things.
And that was one of the biggest
Yeah.
ones that I saw, is
Yeah.
that
Yep.
you know, they went independent of a
Sure.
team effort, you know, and that
Yep.
was one of the things I was a little disappointed on, because we could have brought the information out to people a little bit better than shutting the road down and then saying things.
Yeah, understood. Yep.
The one compliment I have was for Chief Vike. You know, he did an outstanding job during one of the hardest times that I've ever seen, and very much appreciated his job.
Jeff's been a colleague of mine for a bunch of years, and he's a friend of mine as well. I will pass that. I'll pass that along.
Any other board questions or comments?
Sure. Yeah, I have some.
Okay.
One thing I find of interest, there's been an awful lot of, normally there is scuttlebutt after a fire, this or that happened. The Caldor fire, there seems to be an inordinate amount going on there. I was talking to a firefighter who's down there on an initial attack, and it sounds like there was a line put in, and some of the firefighters there thought that line could probably be held. A lot of engines up on 80 and 55, I believe there's a road, and sounds like the Forest Service Hot Shots crew said, hey, we can't hold this line. There's a couple crews down there. Iron Mountain crew is one of them, I believe. And they're like, can't do this. The other crews seem willing to do it. Division chief said, no, we have other plans. So they didn't try to stop that fire very early on. I'd like to look in this fire, and there's also see what went on there. There's also former Supervisor Plaz stopped. There was like 2 or 3 CAL FIRE engines and 3 or 4 pickups leaving, and they said they'd been taken off the fire. Sounds like that may not be quite correct, but that's what the CAL FIRE people, one of the people in the pickup told him. I'd like that looked into. I don't know if it'd be like a grand jury look into it, just talk to people one at a time in a room, where people can testify freely. One problem I ran into is talking to some of the firefighters. Nobody wants to say nothing of record, put their name onto it, because they're scared, and I don't blame them. If you look at history, you pop your head off, your head gets chopped off. But if people are questioned by grand jury, they say, hey, Mr. Bill, what'd you see? Well, then you got to say, so it's not like you're squealing or doing anything wrong. You're just saying what you saw. So I would like to see it go to grand jury. question some people, what happened and why, and get some honest answers. I will say, I did talk to Scott Love, local gentleman. I think a lot of people in this room know Scott. I think he's a credible person, been around a long time. This is a different fire. This is on the Tamarack Fire in Markeyville, California. Scott showed up there, fire's making a run from Markeyville. Unloads his dozer, gets start putting in line. Lady pops up and stops him. I think he said he put her vehicle in front of him. I'm not sure on that though. And this is, he's like, hey, what's the deal? She says, you can't put fire line out here. He says, it's gonna burn the town. She says, it's a natural fire, let it burn. He said, look, it's gonna burn the town, needs to put a line around here. She said, it's a natural fire, let it burn. And Scott's a pretty easygoing guy, but I've never seen him as wound up as he is. He's pretty pissed off right now, to be quite blunt. And I'm sure he's probably pretty unhappy when that lady told him that at that point. And I'm sure he went ahead and put the fire line in. The lady that told him this, according to Scott, I said, well, I hope the hell you got her name. He said, yeah. He said, I know who she is. She's a battalion chief of the U.S. Forest Service. And so I'm looking, I'm going, well, what's going on here? I've been watching this train wreck come for 30 years. From the time I was a baby to about 30 years old, I spent most of my summers up at a place called Caldor. So I've watched what's happened with the spotted owl. We're saving the spotted owl, and I've been telling them for years, all you're gonna do is you're gonna nuke your forest and barbecue the spotted owl. And now what I tell them, all you have done is you've nuked your forest and the spotted owl and our communities too. I had friends in Grizzly Flat. Their places are gone, all of them except for one. And I'm not gonna throw this all at Jeff Marsalis because he is new here, so he has a little bit of my sympathy for that. But this is a endemic, systemic problem within the Forest Service. And I don't blame just the Forest Service, I also blame Congress because they give the Forest Service marching orders. And I also blame the environmental community for a lot of the things they've pushed on the rural areas and our forested areas. They've set us up for this. Where's the environmental community? Do you see a Sierra Club here today? Do you see the Foothill Conservancy here today? All I hear from them is crickets. Maybe there's one up online, but something like this, I would think they'd be here in person. So I'm real unhappy with what's going on. The Markeyville thing is, from what Scott said, it's unconscionable to me. That person should be fired. And it sounds like that fire was not attacked too aggressively down there in that Middle Fork Canyon. And I'll say this, 15 years ago, I took a representative from Congressman Lundgren out with Forest Service to look at the power fire and what went on there. And then we went down to, and I got in trouble. I guess I was a baby supervisor and didn't know better. We went into El Dorado County without notifying them that we were coming. But my intent was good. We went down to a road, I don't remember the name, but it's down by it's down off Omer Ranch Road, almost to Omer Ranch. There's like a little old cattle corral. It's kind of abandoned there. We went back in there and what we showed her was, look at the fuel condition out here. This place, a bomb waiting to go off. That was 15 years ago. And before the Caldor fire, I was up in near it'd be like Five Corners Roads. I took that one up to Ham Station. The road was a mess. There's trees all over. There's dead timber all over. I mean, the amount of fuel loading out there is just absolutely incredible. And I blame the spotted owl and the Forest Service and Congress for that. It's a problem. I don't know how we address it now. The mills are gone. We're in a drought. Trees are dying all over. But anyway, getting back to the Caldor fire. What else I heard in that Caldor fire, and Mr. Marsalis said something about 6 p.m. Normally they used to shut down. I believe is that correct? He's nodding yes. Well, fires generally, not always, but generally they burn less at nights. I think that seemed like, I know it's a little hard to work at night. I think that seemed to be working out there, especially when you're down the bottom of a canyon, low humidity, heavy fuels. You got to be on that. In my notes, what the firefighters out there told me, Division Chief, maybe James Thornock might sound right. Went on the radio at, midnight, hey, I'm going home. My question is, and maybe Mr. Marcellus can answer this, who was the, incident commander after midnight?
On which night are you talking about?
Initial, I believe it'd be Saturday night. Initial attack.
Sean Johnny. Yeah, I think so too. Yeah. Sean Johnny, one of their battalion chiefs.
So he was there and available?
Correct.
Okay. Well, that's not the firefighter. He's saying having problems trying to get a hold of people out there, but it sounds like there's a lot of problems down there in that fire. More so I'd say more on the Forest Service side. I didn't hear a lot of complaints about CAL FIRE, just what I heard. And I think it should really be looked into and just see what happened.
So
I will say one thing I was happy to hear. A CAL FIRE person did emergency hire some follower bunchers, which I think was very helpful for probably protecting Oma Ranch. I have heard that Mr. Emerson, I don't know if it's still current, I haven't talked to him recently, he's having a hard time getting paid, which I thought that sounds kind of bad, but hopefully maybe you folks can look into that and see what's going on there. And one more thing, just another thing, I talked to Mr. Marcellus a while back about something that happened to me, or at least I was part of. Kirkland Meadows PUD called me up probably 2 years ago, had some hazard trees they wanted to cut, 22 trees. They said, you do that? I said, yeah, I could probably come out on a weekend and do it. They called me back. So, well, the Forest Service wants to have a meeting, wants to have a telephone conference to talk about those trees. They said, can you do that? I said, sure, I can do that. 2 or 3 days after that, Kirkland Meadows PUD called me back again. They said, hey, the Forest Service wants to have a sit-down conference. Talk about this is 22 trees, most of them are dead along a high voltage power line. And I said, sit-down conference for what? Well, the Forest Service has, some issues. So I go to this, I said, I can do that. So I go to this conference and sat there for, I don't know, probably 2 hours. And we talked about everything under the sun, cultural, botany, archaeology. And then it got into bird nesting season. Oh my, bird nesting season. It was June to September. We have no activity out there. Now, it's going to be work for Kirkwood Meadows at that point, so I didn't want to cause them problems, so I kept my mouth shut. And I'm listening to this go on for 2 hours. And I'm thinking, these are mostly dead trees, some of them leaning over extremely high voltage power lines out in heavy fuel-loaded forest. I thought, God, where's sanity? And finally, I couldn't take it any longer. I thought, come in kind of easy and nice, so I won't get Kirkwood Meadows in trouble. I said, pardon me. I says, most of these trees are dead, and some have been dead quite a while, and leaning over this power line. And you're worried about the bird nesting season. I said, if one of these trees falls and hits that power line, you have a line strike. I says, you're liable to burn up all your cultural, archaeology, botany, yada, 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 and including the birds in the bird nesting area, let alone a whole bunch more of the forest. Quite honestly, it looked at me like it's worm. Went right back to talking about the bird nesting season. And I want to say it took almost a year to get permission to cut those trees. And I've got a video of one of them, if somebody ever wants to see them. The tree had broke off, leaned over into another tree, not broke off completely, but basically it broke, leaned into another tree, was limb locked, not by much, and leaning over the power line. The point I'm making is we're so busy looking at the spotted owl, the bird nesting season, the this, the that, and we're protecting the forest. Well, our damn forests are burning up. And I'm not throwing this at you, Mike. I'm throwing this at the Forest Service in general. The system is broken, badly broken. You've got NEPA, which Mr. Marcellus has my sympathy there. You got to go through NEPA to do anything, it seems like. It's got to be changed. You also got the Environmental Species Act, which is driving all these things. So we're going to save the spotted owl, but yet we're going to burn 227,000 acres of forest with old growth out there, a lot of species. We're going to burn our towns. I'm not happy at all. Been unhappy for a long time, and my prediction came right. Probably starting about 10 years ago, I told people, I said, I wouldn't be surprised to see one fire burn 1 million acres. Well, we're there.
I'll address a couple of those real quick. So first of all, the
And
difference.
I'd like Mr. Marsalis to address some of those too.
100%, yeah, some of those are his answers,
Okay.
but I want to address the first part of that. I have no doubt what you heard from firefighters coming on the line, going on the line, coming off, that kind of thing. I'm sure they said those things. That is not even remotely uncommon for folks working on the line, regardless if they wear the same uniform, different uniforms, doesn't seem to matter. There are operational differences of opinion all the time on what's the most appropriate, what's the safest, what's the most aggressive, all those kind of things. Those things are commonplace in wildland firefighting. That's why we have a hierarchy in the chain of command where it gets to the operations section chief who gets to make that final decision. So I have no doubt there was folks coming off the line who wish they could have been more aggressive or thought they should have been less aggressive or any of those kind of things, and then they would be willing to vocalize some of those kind of things. So no doubt on that. I will say this on the Caldor fire. This was an aggressive initial attack from the time it started at 6 p.m. or whatever it was on Saturday, August 14th. The first phone call I got on it was about 1:30 in the morning from my duty chief, talking about potential resource orders, all those kind of things. So we were engaged in taking this seriously from the initial attack on. Had a conference call set up.
On that, if
Yeah.
you bear with me a second. Now, that was CAL FIRE's initial attack. Now, was it
So
split joint?
So we have the ECC contract with this board, so we've had this discussion many, many times. We have a closest resource concept both in Amador County and El Dorado County, and that doesn't just apply to ambulances and fire engines and those kind of things. That also applies with the El Dorado National Forest on wildland engines, overhead assignments, dozers, aircraft, all those kind of things. So we have the same boundary drop with the El Dorado National Forest that the fire agencies have here in Amador County. So there was a joint response to that because they had resources available and we had resources available, and the closest resources to that incident all went, some of which included CAL FIRE resources. So we were out there that night with them. Started on the federal DPA, so they were the jurisdictional agency. So the incident commander at that point, that first night, was theirs. But we were engaged with that with battalion chiefs, fire engines, dozers, and hand crews.
The Forest Service was initial attack in command.
100%, yeah. Okay. Yep. And as far as looking into some of those kind of things with grand jury investigations and that kind of thing, I would welcome that. We've heard these questions many, 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 many times. I've done my soul searching. I've looked into some of these questions. I know what the answers are, and I would welcome those answers coming out in the public forum. So I would welcome those inquiries. I am not going to say that the operation was perfect. No operation I don't think ever is, but I will 100% say that there was extreme attention given to the severity of this incident, recognizing the potential of this incident from the time that it was 30 or 40 acres at midnight that night, so much so that I'm on the phone with my duty chief for a couple hours that morning working out different things and that kind of what CAL FIRE needs to do or should be doing with this kind of thing. So the engagement from both agencies and the recognition of where this fire was potentially going to go was recognized out of the gate. Sean Johnny that night at 1 a.m, that prompted the phone call to me, made the statement, this is probably going to end up like the King fire. So the recognition was there early on that this was not something out in the forest that's just going to go out by itself or run into the rocks or something like that. The recognition was there.
No, I heard you worked hard on it, so I thank you for that.
Yeah, but I'm going to get to that the recognition this was going to be a real problem was there.
Yeah, and no doubt, it was taken very seriously by most people. It is a little distressing, though, when you hear that a U.S. Forest Service personnel gave a dozer operator instructions to stop cutting that line because it's a natural fire, let it burn, and that's after Randy Moore, U.S. Forest Service chief, gave the directive.
No,
Tamarack.
No.
Tamarack
We're
fire.
talking about two different fires. So
That's
that's the second part I want to be clear.
But Tamarack fire preceded the Caldor fire, correct?
It did.
And the directive from U.S. Forest Service Chief Moore came out, I think, before the Caldor fire?
Before. So the incident he's talking about, though, was on the Tamarack fire in the town of Markleyville.
Okay.
Yep, so we're talking about two different incidents right now. So, some of the things that you're hearing and believing about the Tamarack fire are probably 100% accurate. That was an entirely different set of events, an entirely different approach to that fire on the initial attack stages than the Caldor fire was. I don't disagree with the things that you're saying about the Tamarack
All
fire.
I said about the Tamarack fire was just Scott Love and the lady. Nothing else I said pertains to Tamarack fire.
Correct, but I'm trying to draw the distinction of that incident that that you're asking about now with the dozer happened on the Tamarack.
Okay, thank
fire
you for the
before. Yeah,
clarification.
happened before that.
On the initial attack, it was stated fuel load was very high. There was a difficulty getting to the source, not enough resources, all that's acknowledged. And then I read an article yesterday from one of the Forest Service personnel who was on the fire, and they said that we did try our best to put it out as an absolute falsehood, but they also said there was large recognition about putting firefighters in harm's way. So did that affect the initial attack at all, or at some point were firefighters pulled back once it hit the more heavily loaded areas?
I would assume probably yes, meaning this, that the folks working on the line, safety, firefighter safety is by far and away the paramount thing when we're going to put anybody attacking a wildland fire. That is first and foremost on the list.
As it should.
I agree, as it should be. And the line leadership out there down to the company officer level have the ability to make that decision. If they are going to put themselves in harm's way by attempting a frontal assault or a hose lay or putting a bulldozer on the ridge line or whatever that piece of action may be, if it is determined that that is going to put them and the crew in harm's way, then their instructions are not to do that. And again, back to some of those things that we talk about, disagreements on the line over best tactics and all those kind of things happen all the time. Resources engaging and disengaging when it becomes unsafe and re-engaging as conditions change. That's the natural ebb and flow of wildland firefighting, and that's not an uncommon thing either. So I don't necessarily know the specifics of exactly what you're talking about, but in premise of crews engaging when fuel conditions become such that the fire becomes too hot to stay direct on it or continue whatever task they're doing, they are instructed to pull back and find another avenue. So
And that
I
was
have no doubt
basically
those things happen.
the statements that were
Yeah.
made by the personnel
Yeah.
that they weren't going to put their crew's lives in harm's way, especially up on a ridge line
Yeah.
where the fire would come at them with significant speed and force.
Yeah, no, and I'm proud of them for doing that. I don't remember what the final total was, but I think it was 18 reportable injuries for firefighters over the 30 some odd days of this thing. And I am as proud of anything of that stat as anything we've done with 5,000 people out there in extreme conditions, extreme terrain, all those kind of things. Not to mention just the sheer volume of vehicle traffic on dirt roads and that kind of thing. The fact that we only had 18 reportable injuries, only one of them ended up in the hospital for any length of time. I'll hang my hat on that. I'm proud of that. So yeah.
Let me interject.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me jump in here too. So, each of our agencies has different operational approaches. CAL FIRE is a 24-hour agency, and we do 12. We have rotating 12-hour cycles on large fires. So when you may have heard, and I can look into the James Thornock at some point saying he's going to go home, and Sean Johnny taking an incident command. They're both Type 3 qualified incident commanders.
So Sean Johnny was on location.
Oh yeah.
Fire.
Oh yeah. No. Yeah. He was on location in command, and so they'll rotate
So was he in command or out of the fire?
Well, I guess I'll have to talk to Sean to find out exactly where he was, but he was in command of the fire and from a location where he felt he could do that appropriately. You got to remember at that point, we're also the incident commanders on the hook for starting to think about the next couple of operational cycles out there. So they were getting ready to place orders for additional resources. We were convening the logistics folks to come together. At some point, you go from that initial attack to the extended attack period, and that extended attack period is when you start to marshal those other resources so that you can get an appropriate long-term response underway. And so when Sean did that and where he was at, I can certainly have some conversations, but James Thornock did then rotate the next day in as incident commander, because you can only work people for so long before it makes sense for them to hand off command. So, and Supervisor Oneto, I'm happy to take some of the data that you're providing around the Tamarack fire and talk to, get you in touch with Bill Dunkelberger, the forest supervisor over there, and do some follow-up work there. But I will say, just so you know where we were at in terms of initial attack, about the same time the Tamarack fire happened, we had a fire in up by Silver Lake called the Summit Fire. And from the time we saw the first smoke, We jumped it with smoke jumpers, had 4 Type 1 helicopters and 3 Type 2 and Type 1 hand crews on it. And we barely caught that thing at 22 acres at 8,500 feet elevation. And that was 3 or 4 weeks before the Caldor. So we'd been emptying the shelves every single time. We'd been emptying the shelves of our resources every single time on every initial attack. We weren't holding things back. We weren't, I know there's general rhetoric about watching fires or letting it burn. That's not true. It doesn't happen that way. There are incidents where people and the public say things, or where the agency takes approaches at firefighting. But I can tell you here in this forest on the Amador El Dorado unit, we've had a long-term, we knew how the fuel conditions were here. We'd been watching it like a slow-moving train wreck, that it was just getting drier and drier. Any experienced woods person walking out in the woods knew how dry and how treacherous the fuels were. So we were throwing every resource at every fire in the attempt to keep them all small here. And so I want to dispel that myth, because we did it on Caldor fire. We sent everything we could. Again, if somebody thought they could hold the line and then somebody else didn't think you could hold the line, it was, what I understand is, from the minute that fire started to, well, essentially when we were able to pin it down up at Lake Tahoe, it was scary, dangerous fire spread. And people knew it, and we knew where the location was. I don't disagree about the fuels conditions that were in that canyon, and I would have liked to have had a better, more active fuels program in place. We're treating on average about 18,000 acres a year, but as you point out, Supervisor Oneto, the laws that we are complying with, whether it's Endangered Species Act or the National Environmental Policy Act or Clean Water Act or any other number, it makes it complex to get these projects on the ground. We're lucky in this forest, both in Amador and El Dorado County, to have remarkable partners. So we have, like, the National Wild Turkey Federation is one of our partners, who's doing a tremendous amount of work actually in that area. We give and grant them funding, and then through that they are able to actually convene the timber fallers and the masticators and do that work on our behalf. We've got other partnerships that we would love to expand, but the funding sometimes is not there. It's complex now, as you point out, Supervisor Oneto, the market conditions for wood products. Just take that piece alone. We had timber sales we issued a timber sale to contractors, and this year, because the bottom fell out of the market, they asked us to extend a year or two so that they can maybe get a little bit of value from the wood products. And it doesn't matter if it's fir or cedar or pine, there's no value to be had in any of these markets now. And so it's hard when you issue a timber sale to a prospective bidder, and then they can't get the money out of the wood products, so it drives the cost of their operation up, which then they're looking for more favorable market conditions.
So why is that the case, that they can't make any money from the timber sales? Because the wood prices are pretty high, from what I've been told.
And the market,
or lumber.
Yeah, I hear you. And the U.S. is still a net importer, and there's only limited market capability of supply, like industry, to do the work, and they're 100% maxed out with private timber.
Well, the short answer, Chairman Axe, is back in the spotted owl debacle, which is something, I was in the logging industry for a lot of years. They came in and said, oh, the spotted owl came along. You saw the lumber mills got all just shook out. A lot of them went broke, went out of business. So you've got numerous mills shut down, actually gone in California. So the amount of sawmills left in the state is way reduced. So the amount of demand for logs is way reduced. So you basically have one company pretty much has a monopoly in California. Okay. And so they kind of buy what they want, when they want to buy it, at what price they want to buy it. And now you have such a massive amount of fuel burnt logs. There's not enough mills to utilize them, and they have enough their own timber burnt.
So what about, let me finish, what about biomass and biofuels?
We're maximizing that where we can in that 18,000 acre average. Our biomass projects fit in there in the total, but we're still having to subsidize the haul costs in many cases because of and I'm not an expert in the biomass, kind of the market side, the power market side, but that is only good within certain geographic ranges, and if we can get subsidies for transportation. There are some small operators who are working on now, looking at doing some international shipping. We've got a couple of folks have been talking to the Forest Service about trying to do some processing of federal timber so it can ship overseas to Korea for biomass. They have, large biomass plants over there, but it's highly complicated. You have to have another federal agency approve the shipping of that material, so you're not importing bugs and other sort of pests into another country across the seas. The regulations are highly difficult and challenging to work through. But I think the point that Supervisor Oneto made is we have reduced the overall number of available sawmills in the state substantially over time, over the last 25 years. And that in and of itself now is a huge barrier. Us trying to pick up the pace and scale of the timber, you have to be able to get the value piece out of the material in order to help offset the operational costs. And if you can't do that, then it's a very challenging financial plan for folks to want to entertain, quite frankly. It's that simple. We do a lot more stewardship contracting now where we're paying an equal amount for the work done on the national forest as the value of the wood. But then that's subject to availability of funding. And we've been very successful working with the state of California's greenhouse gas grant program. And federally, we're matching with federal dollars, every chance we can. A lot of the projects are kind of in a 50-50 match, federal funding to some of these grant programs. But it's just not enough. It's just not enough to keep ahead of it. And it's not enough, the industry itself, somebody who has a logging side, if you can keep that operational a good chunk of the year, I think, they're thinking, why would I expand and buy more equipment? Some of it costs $500,000, $1 million a piece. Why would I do that if I only have 2 or 3 years worth of predictable project funding? And so one of the big tasks we're trying to shoot for is how do we create a 10-year program of work? Yeah. So that the industry knows we've got 10 years of predictable funding for them to bank on.
Let me just jump in here. So being a kind of a policymaker, or at least somebody that has to support or oppose policies being created at the state level and federal level, what are the best solutions? Fuel breaks, forest restoration, fuel treatments, logging. What's the plan, short term, long term? How do we reduce the devastation from the fires, but at the same time, we need our forests for a lot of other reasons. We're in a serious drought. I'm certain a lot of people, everyone's just been careful to say it's not climate related, but it very well probably is. Anyway, that being said, what's the plan? And how well did the fuel breaks, because it looks like there were fuel breaks along the 50 corridor and other places that were already in place. What are we going to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one, there are policy issues, even with Caldor, the restoration of the Caldor fire. We would love to work with this board and the board of El Dorado County to talk about some of those policy changes that may be necessary to help us expedite the restoration of the forest. The first few days of the fire, the first 10, 15 days of the fire was as you know, the runs were huge. Some cases a 40,000-45,000 acre run. And so much of the kind of the footprint around the Amador and El Dorado County proper, those are the most severely burned right now. And so in many cases don't have, and there was a lot of fuels projects that both completed and planned that it burned through. So we're starting the restoration planning process to look at what do we do with all of that. But on the upper end, that kind of higher elevation, that Pack Saddle Pass area up to Kirkwood, there's a lot of places where the burn severity wasn't that high. Big runs, big fingers where the the timber stands burned out really hot, but a lot of other places where it's not. And so we're starting to look at the restoration planning now, both with timber removal, trying to get what we can out of there before it loses value, and that'll take NEPA to do that. And so we're going to entertain some of that as early as this fall and start that in earnest. But I will say that the bigger piece is around some of the market side of the equation, the funding side of the equation. We have highly successful groups. UMRA is a good example. They put great projects on the ground. So figuring out how we can take the master stewardship agreement that we already have in place with them and funnel funding so that they can help then create a longer term contract option. That's a place where we could do some work. And if the infrastructure bill passes, it would be very predictable for us to be able to say, hey, we think there's some long-term funding here. What can we do in partnership? There's some other things, though. The international shipping ban continues to come up over and over and over. Federal logs cannot be shipped internationally unless they're processed. That's the short version of all the laws that surround that. Well, Caldor Fire could be a place where we work in partnership to try to look for what exemptions might make that workable, because that does two things. It gives us a footprint for where the projects can be put on the ground and a known location where there's some timber value to return back into the restoration. So I'd be more willing to work with the board to talk about some of those policy changes as our restoration plans start to emerge.
You know, I'm on the UMRA board, and they've done some projects in coordination with the Forest Service. Thank you, Chief Blackheim. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand you got to, somewhere else you got to go, so we thank you. A while back, I kind of took UMRA board to task, or just in general, I was very unhappy because they had a project, and the project says they'd cut no trees bigger than 14 inches. And I told them, if that's the case, don't even bother. You're wasting your time. Yeah. What needs to be done is be able to hire some good, competent foresters and let them manage the forest. Otherwise, you get to this limitation, this restriction coming from, I guess I'll say it because what it is, the environmental community, which I think wants nothing done out there, or as little as possible. But they don't want to say that, so they'll say, well, we don't want to do this, nothing bigger than 14 inches. A 14-inch tree, if you can't cut nothing bigger than that, your forests are going to continue to burn. And then on another sale, I think the foresters are doing, had like a masticate, it's like a thinning project. Nothing bigger than 10 inches came from I think the naturalist, or otherwise have to go through a full-blown, I believe, NEPA maybe. Well, that's, if you're not cutting nothing bigger than 10 inches, you're spending a lot of money putting up that timber sale. Somebody's gonna go out and it's not gonna sell because 10 inches and smaller is all biomass, and most biomass plants, have been shut down because the air board, some of the California authorities don't like biomass. So I mean, if you're not cutting trees, if you're not doing the job, you're not gonna get the job done. And going out there and saying we're gonna cut nothing bigger than 14 inches is window dressing. It won't get the job done.
Yeah, I don't know about, you know, I haven't been around long enough to know what the rules were that particular group was talking about. But I can say on this landscape, we're going to have to remove bigger than 14-inch trees.
And part of the, I'd like to read something to you real quick, like something I sent out. 1 gallon of gas has 116,000 British thermal units BTUs. So if you look at, say, 20 dry tons per acre out there in the forest, and you know it's probably more than that in average, would you agree?
Oh, yeah. In places.
Average. If you take that forest out there, you've got 20 bone dry tons per acre of down logs, standing dead trees. If you calculate how much BTUs that is, I came up with 2,756 gallons of gas per acre. You got that kind of fuel loading and energy out there. You can blame it climate change, you can blame whatever, but any normal, typical dry summer year, you get a fire going, that kind of wood out there, it's going to go up like a bomb. And that's where we're at. And so, I mean, I don't know, to tell you the truth, if I was in your job, I don't know how I could fix it, quite honestly, because the mills are gone, all the regulations you have to work with. We got a major problem. the answer is above you, it's above me. I don't know if the Congress can fix it now, because your infrastructure, which you need to do your job, is gone. The mills.
Well, I would say relationships matter. Our relationship, how we work together, how we set tone around what we'd like to see. Each party, and that's, you know, back to Caldor. I'm very proud of the fact that when CAL FIRE and the Forest Service stood shoulder to shoulder on the incident, you know, from initial response till we came out of unified command 30 days ago, after the IA, I can tell you that we looked at where we had policies that made things possible. And I know this has often been a very binary conversation. Either you're for logging or you're against it. Either you're for air quality or you're not. And the truth is, I think that has hardened people's positions. And because people are having hardened positions, it's harder to come together and collaborate on solutions. So if 14 inches isn't the right diameter for the project, how do you get the people together so they're talking about building the path forward? And I can tell you what we've experienced in the West is a wake-up call for everybody. 100% across the board. People are seeing the magnitude of these fires, are recognizing forest practices we thought once were the right forest practices are not sufficient. But it starts right here. It starts with us choosing the path to how do we work together? What policies can the board take a position on that might actually help move us forward on some things? How can we get what, you know, the Forest Service is thinking might be some funding in the system? How can we get that directed to the right folks that we can get work done on the ground? Amador County, I think, is a great example of a county like El Dorado, where the forest isn't just sort of in your backyard. It's part of the ecosystem. It's part of the county tradition. It's part of how we evolved in the history here. And so I'd love to take advantage of that as a partnership and say, yeah, what do we need to do to get this forest footprint back on track for restoration? Because I don't have the answers. You're right, Supervisor Oneto, I don't. But I also don't believe somebody else above me has to solve them all. I do think we are in a position, Caldor was a high enough priority, it was a nationwide attention, and if we come up with a good restoration plan and partnership that's good for a county, it's good for the Forest Service, it's good for the local governments, it's good for the private industry who's doing the work, I think it'll make a difference and we'll influence those above us and around us, knowing our roles are different. And so I'd invite us to think and talk collectively there, because I do think Caldor Fire represents opportunity for us to change that, whether that's international shipping ban or that's, you know, multi-year programs of work. We've got industry who's ready to rally. If you've seen the hazard tree work that's going on Mormon Immigrant Trail or up some of the big arterial roads, you know, we called them, said, hey, can you come here and help us mitigate some of these hazard trees so they don't fall on our firefighters? And they brought resources, and of course we're paying them through the fire, and there's, you know, regular. We're not asking them to volunteer, but they came.
You know, restoration's part of it, but also something I look at is, you know, a friend of mine said the other day, well, you know, if we keep going the way what we're talking about is one of the reasons we live where we live is we love the mountains. And he says the way it's going, at some point the mountains are going to be gone. What we live here for is a lot of it's already gone. Now, will it come back in time? Yeah, probably 50 to 100 years, you'll have somewhat of a forest back. But for 50 years, it's going to be generally a brush patch, small trees. I cut trees that got burnt over by Grizzly Flat in this Caldor fire, over 8 foot in diameter. I mean, just massive trees. I remember it was a beautiful place. I told my son, hey, one of the weekends we're going to go up there and do some work. And he says, Dad, he said, I really don't want to go back. He says, I'd like to remember how it was. And when we were there, we were walking a ditch, cutting some hazard trees. And what we're talking about was, remember what I said, these damn trees, they shouldn't be paying me to cut them. They should have sold them to loggers, and loggers should be taking them out for free. And the amount of dead wood and standing dead trees out there was incredible. It was an absolute firebomb waiting to go off. And then I'm going to beat up the Forest Service a little bit more here. Sorry, Jeff, but the Forest Service went out and they did a hand thinning project, which should have been done probably with a machine, but a lot more effective, a lot better job. They cut all these small trees by hand, including a lot of dogwoods, which really aren't a fuel problem. And they stacked them in piles. And I thought, after this fire happened, I asked him at Grizzly Flat, I say, those piles, did they ever burn them? Because I didn't think they had. He said, no, at least the fire burned them. So that made the fuel, all those dry piles stacked everywhere out there, made the fire burn hotter. And it's just, you know, stuff like this, I've seen it for years. I'm just tired of it.
Okay, Supervisor Forster had some questions.
I was gonna say some things, but I'd rather yield to the public now and take some public comment
let's
and
have
hear what,
public
hear what other people have to
Okay.
say. And
Come on down.
Thank you guys for agendizing this. John Campbell, Cedar Creek, California.
Welcome.
I think the reason that there's some skepticism about the Forest Service response is because we have a long history in this area of the Forest Service having piss poor responses to fires. I mean, the Tamarack just had happened weeks before this, and they did sit and watch it burn for 2 weeks. And they were informed this is burning still up there, and we're monitoring it. And it did imperil Markleyville. It did lose houses and cabins there. It burned into Nevada, for crying out loud, across sagebrush. I mean, and that's why. I mean, with the Woodford's fire 25 years before that, where the Forest Service went up there, the locals tried to put it out. The Forest Service said, we have this as our incident, and 19 or 20 houses burned in that canyon. Now the Tamarack fire just destroyed that canyon again, and that whole area that had burned in the 80s, it hadn't recovered yet. And when we look at mitigation and remediation thing, you go to the Power Fire and tell me that's remediation. That was in 2005. It is whitethorn and buckbrush. And the roads that were in the affected area, they're now closed. The Forest Service says there's no funding. Panther Creek Road's been closed since 2015. And it's probably because of the erosion that was never remediated properly in the first place that washed that road out. And so that's why we're having a serious problem here. And I'm sorry, the Forest Service ethos is generally just close it. If we can't take care of it, we can't manage it, close it. We had COVID closures last year. We had, it's too dry closures the year before that, I believe. And now we have closures on Hongaleti Ridge, or what they call Hongaleti Ridge, keeping OHVs off for the idea that it's part of the Power Fire or the part of the Caldor Fire scar. And that's simply not the case. The fire never got in the area. It seems more about keeping OHVs out of the area and hunters. And we've had hunting seasons the last 2 or 3 years where hunters can't access it. The state does not offer refunds when you can't actually go hunting on your own public lands. And so that's a problem. I mean, I understand the biomass thing. The California Air Resources Board made biomass not part of green energy, and they were before. So what they were doing was the utility companies were getting a credit back buying green energy. And so unfortunately, a lot of that biomass that was going to these biomass plants had a nice subsidy from the state, and it was going there, it was being used for energy production, and now it's not because there's just no incentive for the power companies because they're not getting that green energy credit. And so instead it's just burning in the forest, and that's unfortunate. And I understand, I mean, I think most Forest Service employees are well-intended. I've worked with a lot of them. I just talked to Rick at the fire scene, actually. But we just have to simply do more. We can't let these communities be imperiled. It is costing your constituents money. When these fires burn and they become mega fires on these places with huge fuel loads, the insurance companies either cancel their insurance or they make it so expensive that people can't afford it. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of these fuel loads surrounding these rural communities in the West. There's 596,724 acres in the El Dorado National Forest. This was the only log-in sale listed on their website. Now, this is like a couple sections on a fire salvage. It has to be more than that. We cannot sustain the path we've been going on. It's simply not tenable. And closing the forest anytime there's any action, can't do that either. Americans should be able to access their public lands. And please, I implore you to get some of those ridges open for hunting season. There are only 2 weeks left. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Anybody on Zoom?
Yeah, hi, this is Rich Farrington.
Hi, Rich.
You can hear me, I guess, okay.
Yeah, we got your email, but why don't you just try to summarize some of the salient features, because we've been kind of going on this particular item for a while.
Okay, I'll do that. All three of your fire officials pointed to dry fuels as a major factor in wildfires. And, you know, Fires are getting bigger, hotter, and faster moving. Years ago, during the Power Fire, in 2004, it was 18,000 acres in Amador County. And I thought, wow, this is a huge fire. Now we've got the Caldor at 220,000, got the Dixie Fire close to 1 million. Caldor burned up 782 houses, I hear. At this rate, national forests will be burned up within 20 years. And this is according to Ken Pemlott, the retired CAL FIRE chief, and converted to brush fields. I think that's true. I think Power Fire is a big brush field. Ken made this statement last Friday at the 2CARE conference in Sonora. Wind is, your experts, I think, will agree, wind is a critical factor in developing catastrophic fires. We can't control the wind. We're just subject to it. The wind will blow embers miles and keep aircraft out of the air, so we can't tell how fast the fire is going or which direction. But we can control the vegetation. It can be thinned. The Caldor and Dixie fires are the first two fires, I understand, to burn over the top of the Sierra Nevada. So obviously that supports the dryness and the high fire risk. The Camp Fire was subject to this high wind, and they couldn't get aircraft up. They didn't know how fast it was coming in. There's a video of that I sent that I think people need to look at, because it's the wake-up call. It should be now. Killed 85 people, some in their homes, some in their cars. A lady described the doors burning, and then the phone went dead. So it's just shocking. The Washington fire 2 months ago in Sonora nearly burned up Sonora, but they lucked out, I understand, because there was really no wind. I mean, the area around Sonora is kind of similar to the lower elevations, west of the national forest. Kim Pimlott said this risk of catastrophic fire is not being treated as the emergency that it is. And I think he's right. He said also, we need to be on a war footing. Activities are needed year round, not just putting fires out. The fuels, I think, is, again, I'd like to know if anyone disagrees that the overgrown forest and dry fuels is not an emergency. I think everybody will agree. I'll listen in case somebody disagrees. What can the Amador County Board of Directors, Board of Supervisors do to protect our citizens, our homes, and our forests for this emergency? Pimlott also said that many areas have plans, and I think we do have some upcountry, but they failed to implement them. And coordination has been lacking. So I'm wondering, what can the Board of Supervisors do to help with a coordinated effort? I think, and I hate to see us get into this logging versus no logging. I think the real issue is preparing the forests to prevent catastrophic wildfire. And I think Supervisor Marcellet has offered up a suggestion of working with the board on some issues, and I think that's restoration. I can see, I spent a fair amount of time in the Power Fire area, and I see a lot of dead trees and 15-foot tall brush. And those dead trees are falling, building up the ground fuels and the brush. And I think that area is subject to even bigger fire than it was in 2004. I know there's been disagreement over the past of the value of standing dead trees to wildlife. But on the other hand, I wonder if they took into account that they are going to help build up the fuel layer and create an even bigger fire. So I think that's, I think I want to know if the board can do something. I think action is needed, and I'd like to hear what the board can do. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Rich. Well, just kind of going back to what Jeff suggested, do we have an approach to collaborate with the U.S. Forest Service, CAL FIRE, and other stakeholders on policy issues? Is there something we can put together? Do we already have an existing, body that does that? Do you have any comment on that, Jeff?
Yeah, so I know we have an MOU with the board that Rick Hobson, my district ranger, was sharing with me. I think we've fallen away from I guess we met in the field once a year and had some regular coordination conversations around. So I don't know a whole lot about that. I think the pandemic has impacted our ability to kind of pull that together, but he suggested that we could start there. I know there's other, El Dorado County has convened a working group, has directed staff to convene a working group around wildfire preparedness and forest health. And up in Lake Tahoe, there are groups like the Tahoe Fire and Fuels Team, which it has all land management agencies, fire agencies, and even some of the regulatory agencies at the table. So there's models around there about how folks can be working across jurisdictions to do, take advantage and take steps in that sort of direction. But
great. So do we have one here?
Yes, sir. Chairman Axe, Supervisor Neto, and myself.
That's what I thought.
Are on the U.S. Forest Service MOU committee.
Okay.
And so we have, as stated, we have done out, and Rick Hobson has shown us projects that they're working on and future projects. One of the things that have always kind of surprised me, though, is that when they go out there further, as we talk about regulations, we need to thin out some of those regulations because they come out with a prescribed fire program, and it's a 4-inch thick binder, for them to get stuff done, when you have that much information, a lot of it gets lost, so that's been the hardest thing that I've seen.
Okay, but can we reinitiate that and bring some recommendations back to the board? And are there other stakeholders in addition to the Forest Service that would be involved, or?
So I don't have the details of the MOU just because I haven't had the opportunity to engage with it. And Rick just briefed me before I came here today, but I can do some investigation. We can certainly come back.
Can we engage with at least the El Dorado group?
For sure.
And try to cross-pollinate or, pick up whatever they're doing, learn from,
Sure.
their mistakes or their successes, and, create some kind of forward momentum, at least some ideas that we can shop around and begin to discuss back at the dais. Is that something you and Supervisor Neto can engage on, or?
We can work with something, but it is not just the Forest Service. It is also a little bit of everything.
Sure.
If I keep calling on this, it's an octopus. I had a wonderful briefing from I'm going to say her name wrong, Kayla Dale at AFPD on the Firewise program for, this is all the residential areas. So it's everything we need to keep going forward and everything way we can push to help out. But we're going to need a lot of help from the state, as far as, because the state seems to be one of the biggest that are putting roadblocks in front of us.
Well, the state, what I was able to read, there's funding that at least, I don't know if it's been passed legislatively, but they were going to set aside hundreds of millions of dollars for forest restoration and management and things like that. So that's everything. So clearly, and that was several years back. I don't know, that may have kind of been put on hold or somewhat derailed, and, you know, there is funding. There's also the cap and trade, funding as well, which, if there's projects that can be, that could fall under that, then that money could be utilized as well.
And many of our collaborative groups, ACCG or Fire Safe Council, the Grizzly Fire Safe Council, we've been very successful in getting some of those funding lines in the hands of those folks so that they can get work done on the ground. Again, it's a pace and scale question.
Right. There's also a small private individual, I don't know, company that is going to be utilizing the old cedar mill, is going to be putting in a small mill operation. Also wants to utilize woody biomass to create hydrogen. So there's also a company in West Sacramento that is using wood products to create biofuels and chemicals from that. So this could be the mills also to a certain extent of the future. And we have a lot of woody biomass around here that just keeps growing as soon as you cut it down. So, you know, these are, you know, there's a lot that needs to be engaged here and brought to bear, and at least put it on the table and start looking at it and talking about it. You know, yeah, okay, there's binders that are thick and we can, you know, talk about that, but, you know, we need to do something as opposed to absolutely nothing. So
I think the place to start is to go by that MOU and have our board committee meet with U.S. Forest Service representatives again, and at least have that be the starting point to initiate action.
Mr. Chairman, I don't think we were done with public comment yet. We had a Zoomer out there.
Okay.
I think may have given up, but
come back, Zoomer.
If there's anybody on Zoom who wants to there we go. Right.
Cindy. We're going to unmute you, Cindy. Can you state your name, Cindy?
Good morning. This is Cindy Grant Boyce, a local community member. In regards to the 60 Minutes special that was mentioned earlier, I just wanted to add my thoughts that I actually really appreciated the USFS and CAL FIRE being cautious and not utilizing this to protect the boots on the ground. I know fires are a very emotional issue for all of us, but I don't think a lot of people understand what a huge coordinated effort it is to move all the troops on the ground before you just start dropping water, retardant, everything else. This stuff hits trees, which breaks limbs, which kills people. And although I do think that all technologies should be looked at, first and foremost, use caution to protect our lives and don't just jump to conclusions that it was mismanagement or miscommunication between agencies, that there was real thought put into protecting the lives of private industry and firefighters that were out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Cindy. Is there any other public comment?
Go ahead, Catherine, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you. This is Catherine Evett. I'm speaking as a private individual. I wanted to point out that one of the partnerships that's been very successful is the Amador Calaveras Consensus Group in this area. Working through the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Act, the ACCG was able, with the Forest Service, to bring $16.8 million plus equal match for fuel reduction and forest restoration projects in our area. And that includes that thinning project that was done along Highway 88, the U88 project. And that's a diverse collaborative that's made up of a number of different people. I'd also like to point out that there's actually a history before any of you were on the board of people coming to the Board of Supervisors and asking that they support additional funding from the Congress for fuel reduction. And I was part of that years ago, and I say it was before any of your time on the board. So people have been looking at this for some time. So I would encourage the county to get involved again in the ACCG as they were when the late John Hoffman was alive, to use that existing structure to help bring in more money. CAL FIRE was involved in the past. The Forest Service is an integral part of it. It helped connect the Upper McCollum River Watershed Authority with the Forest Service for the Master Stewardship Agreement that came about because the ACCG made the connection. So you have existing venues to use. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, and I would suggest that you use them. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Go ahead, Mr. Farrington.
Yeah, I just wanted to second the comment by Supervisor Brown that that the defensible space programs and Firewise communities certainly apply to the private lands. And but I drove through this wildfire that nearly burned up Sonora last week. It turned out it burned mainly on city property that had never been touched, way overgrown, very dry. So I think somehow or other your committee needs to come up with some kind of a plan to engage the private landowners. We have some extremely dense forests, especially along critical evacuation routes like Highway 88. Anyway, a lot of questions that I'd like to see more than just the federal or the national forest lands addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So Supervisors Brown and Amador, you're going to meet with Chief
Rick Hopkins, Marshall,
Hopkins and Jeff as well, and then engage some of the others. I used to attend the ACCG meetings pretty regularly, but since the pandemic, I have not attended one. So I'll try to go back to those in the near future.
I guess I'll continue to meet, but I'm a little bit tired of meeting.
Well, why can't we come up with some policy recommendations that we can get behind as a board?
Oh, we can do that, but I'm not, I mean, and we have to, but I'm not sure how much good it's gonna do. Maybe if you get enough boards, enough states.
Can't say we'll agree on everything, but you know, let's try to take one step forward.
I guess I'm going with that, Frank. It's the NEPA deal. It's the CEQA deal. Like I was talking about, I wish Mike Blankheim was still here. He had to go to, I guess, another meeting, but I was talking to a CAL FIRE, I believe he's a battalion chief a while back, and he told me that CAL FIRE had spent, I think, almost $1 million trying to get through CEQA to do some kind of control burn over by Camino. And I said, I asked him again, I said, you said $1 million? He said, yeah, about $1 million what they spent trying to get all the, I think probably, I don't know if it's archaeological, cultural, what all it was, but I thought, you know, we've got a problem here. So we're so busy scratching, sniffing, looking at stuff and quantifying this and quantifying that. It's all burning up.
Let me cut you off. Do you want to do it or not, or do you want someone else?
No, I'll still do it because probably nobody has a better background on this board than I do.
Okay,
as far as
fine.
what we're talking about.
Then let's do that.
I'm frustrated, Frank. We've been talking for years, and we watch your towns burn, we watch your forests burn.
Okay.
I'm real sick of it.
Well,
I think another big part of it is the legislative side on advocating for Congress to increase the budget for U.S. Forest Service so that we can concentrate on fuels reduction, because historically the Forest Service budget has been very low. So let's spend the money on fuels reduction rather than spending it on emergency dollars to go to fire suppression.
And that's true. Another way they can do that is
recommendation.
Sorry, I thought you.
Yeah.
Another way they can also, that what Richard said is probably true, but also if they will reduce all the CEQA requirements, that's giving the foresters a budget increase right there, because the amount of money they got to spend on the NEPA and that is incredible.
With the environmental strangleholds on the forest, you guys would meet until you're old and gray.
That's it, exactly.
I agree with you there, Supervisor. Annette.
Maybe you made the point a lot better than I did, but that's where it's coming from. Thank you.
Yep. And for these poor guys, same problem.
Yeah?
All right, well, why don't we do that?
There's that. Also, one thing I would like to come out of this, I would like to send a letter from board to the grand jury, asking them to look into, the Caldor fire. And maybe if they could even, well, the Markyville fire wasn't in Amador County, but I mean, I would love to hear some on that too, because I think it needs to be brought out in the wash where people can say, I was asked by grand jury to say what I saw and what happened, and this is what I saw. Because people aren't going to step forward, and the only ones I've talked to, one person made, other ones, they don't want to, they're worried about getting in trouble.
Can we do that if the incident occurred in El Dorado County? Because I think that's what you're describing.
It burnt part of Amador.
But it was much further.
I don't think that matters.
Okay.
It's worth looking into.
Is that something we can do?
That's a good question. And,
Okay. If we can, then I'll support that.
It's not
That's fair enough.
Okay.
Area of
You
expertise.
don't have to answer today. We won't put you on the spot. All right,
She's only been here for one meeting, so
yeah, so we'll look into that, and then we can discuss it at a future date.
That's fair enough.
All right. Any other questions or comments on this? Well, I want to thank everybody that came down today, Jeff, Chief White, and Chief Blankenheim, and Tom Tinsley. And I think that we have our work cut out for us, and I appreciate your time. Should we take a quick break, or should we just power through 4D? Okay, power through. All right, so we're going to move on to item 4D. Thanks again, Jeff and Walt. And
Thank you all.
look forward to talking to you again in the near future. So this is the discussion and possible action regarding the request by the library for a tech van funded by the ARPA funds. And Laura Einsteiger
We're waiting
is
very
going to come down and
patient.
talk about it. Boy, you've been very patient.
My middle name.
Patience.
I have just some general information about how I came about this proposal that
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
So, good morning. I guess it's still morning, almost afternoon. So when we were asked to come up with ideas of ways to expend some of the ARPA funding, I looked at what that funding would cover, and one of the areas was technology. And I thought, given the numbers of people that do come to the library currently and ask for assistance with technology, whether it's a computer or printing or their phone or other devices, that going out into the field rather than having people necessarily come to the library might be a way of using some of those funds. And also looking at making the library more mobile. And again, to reach folks that are unable to get into the brick and mortar libraries, as it were. And so I thought of a bookmobile. I've actually been thinking about this, and I know we've discussed this with a different board many years ago. I think it was back in 2008. But the idea of the bookmobile just kind of came out of my thinking about ways to expend those funds and the needs of the people in Amador County. A bookmobile could provide not just a tech van to assist with helping people with technology and improving digital literacy skills, but it could also be used to visit children at school, to have a library sign-up card day, to reach more people in elementary schools, because right now, the only ones that would come in for a sign up, for library cards are those that can actually get to the library. Most of the time, we see people from Jackson Elementary at the main library, and I know in Plymouth from the Plymouth school, and in Ione from Ione schools, but not as much from upcountry. So with a bookmobile, we would be able to go to some of those communities easier because we're mobile, and we would be able to set up time ahead of time to let people know that we were coming. We could have regular stops. We could visit First Five, Head Start, senior housing, assisted living care centers, the ARC, Upcountry Community Center, Lake Comanche area. I mean, frankly, the sky's the limit, as I said. So that's why I was kind of coming up with this as an idea. This would not be one of the standard gigantic bookmobiles, which requires a special license to drive, but rather one of the Sprinter vans, a 24-foot long by, I think it's 80 inches wide, and there's about 170-foot wheelbase. Interior height is 66 to 78 inches, so it would be possible to stand up, especially if you're short like me. But and then it would also have Wi-Fi connection. There is a modem called Cradle Point. It's something that's similar, found in sheriff and police vehicles. And then additionally, this vehicle could have an awning, so that the awning could come out, especially when we were providing outside events, or doing programming outside. We could bring story times to daycare providers. We could do that for First Five and Head Start. And the bookmobile would also have bookshelves, carts, tables, and a system to check out books and assist people in looking up information.
What was the internet protocol you were talking about?
Cradle Point.
So how long would this be parked in a neighborhood? Like an hour, 2 hours? 10
Yeah, it would
5 hours?
depend on where we were going for the visit, and that would determine the schedule. But I would think,
Because someone might just kind of get into using the internet and then you drive away.
oh yes, there would be that. But I'm thinking like a block of time that we would set up ahead of time. So and we would obviously have to do regular types of scheduling to ensure that we were there long enough.
Some kind of antenna to broadcast or pick it up through satellite or something?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't know all the tech details. I mean, I have information about the Cradle Point because I was looking at applying for a grant and attended a series of webinars from the state library that kind of talked about the types of things that you would be looking for on a bookmobile van type of vehicle.
Communities already doing something like this?
Calaveras applied for a grant and was granted funding and is in the process of having a vehicle built currently. Tuolumne had a bookmobile. I don't know whether they're still using it or whether they had to take it off the road because of funding issues. Stockton has a bookmobile fleet. They have quite a large one, and they're looking to replace the current one that they have. And I don't think Lodi has, no, I know they don't. So Stanislaus would be the other. Those are all the libraries that are within our network. But there are many other libraries throughout the state of California that do have bookmobiles, and they work very well in terms of reaching, especially for outreach.
Okay, so these high-tech bookmobiles, this isn't the bookmobile I grew up with that you're describing?
No.
Or me.
I just looked it up right quick. Their endpoint using cell sites. And, you know, of course, my district has very low cell site availability. So any other thoughts of what could be done?
In terms of the,
The communication.
yeah, and that would be something that I would have to investigate and find out what would work better given our terrain here. I know that's been an issue too. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, we were discussing
Right.
this and providing extra hotspots. In fact, I had actually asked for, and was granted several Wi-Fi hotspots, but when we received them, that particular vendor does not reach some of the outlying areas, especially upcountry.
The only problem I can see with something like this is I would want it to be very successful. And if it's not very successful, we're left with a van. And what do we do with that van? So the personnel, yeah, they'd be part-time, what you said, about 15, 20 hours per week.
Correct.
We would have to purchase the van before we find out if it's not going to be a success or if it is going to be a success.
Well, I think the success, just like anything, just like the library itself, is born out of the type of service that we provide to people, and that we're providing a service that people are encouraged to take advantage of. And I know, just given the types of requests that we get daily, this is definitely something I think that would be more than successful. Plus, it gives us the opportunity to get out into the community rather than requiring people to come to us. It expands our hours and gives us more flexibility. I mean, we could go to events. We can go, for example, to the county fair, which is more difficult for us to do right now. But with this, we bring the library to you. So.
Yeah, I don't know if people go to the county fair to get a book, but.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be about the just a book. The library's a lot more than just books and information.
And are we budgeted for the half-time position?
We'd have to work on that one. No, we're not.
But I don't want to cut library services to fund this position.
Right.
Understood.
Yeah, that was my question, buying the van, and I think it's well worth the risk to get out there. But you got maintenance costs on a vehicle like that. And the staffing, I don't think you could do with volunteers. You'd have to have a stipend or something for however you did it. So it's the long look at the expenses that, like, because I agree with Supervisor Forster, we don't want to cut the limited services we have.
Correct.
To try something new.
Well, what can ARPA pay for? Can ARPA pay for any of the staff? Or just the bookmobile itself?
Yeah, no staff.
Okay.
But the investment of the bookmobile and all of its, the tech that goes with it is right down the ARPA alley. It's the expansion of access to technology that ARPA is trying to encourage. And this is, given the number of people that come to the library to use our computers at all the different branches, there is a lot of demand out there.
Yes.
Right.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I think the face of the library has really changed from when I used to go to the library.
Yeah. Very much so.
But I think too, that when you're going places, people have demand, but it's when they want to have the demand, when you show up, I don't see that demand being there like, okay, people are going to want to, you're going to be moving to different spots, so how do they know where the van is?
Well, it can't be random, and it's going to have to be a predetermined pattern.
Correct.
So that they know.
A regular schedule, plus, though, being flexible enough that if, say, for example, a school would like us to come for a visit, that we're able to do that as well.
So what would you do there at the school what would the van do?
So my example was that if there was a library sign-up day, that let's say we were going to Pine Grove Elementary, and we were going to be there for a set number of hours, and so we come there, we sign children up for their library card, they get a book from the van, we tell a story, we do some story times, we can do crafts, we can also do
Can't you do that with just a person going there and telling it almost what purpose does the van serve beyond just somebody showing up at school and doing it?
Because we could serve more children doing it this way, and we're not, because we're bringing more with us, and it's more flexible than just having one person show up. You know,
Isn't the van like about $150,000 to buy?
Fully equipped is more than that.
More than that?
Yeah.
Well, the Sprinter vans are only, unless you do the inside, they're only like 50 or 60,000.
But it's
And
plus all of the, yes,
put
the inside
special
of it.
guts in.
Mhm.
Usually people have like beds and kitchens and things like that.
Yeah, it wouldn't be,
Yeah.
it's the shelving
We're
and
not
the
buying an RV,
awning
Frank.
and-
Pardon me?
We're not buying an RV.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
Pretty
they
close.
do is, yeah, they turn them into RVs. They're like the compact RV.
No. I don't know. I mean, I think what Supervisor Cruz said, then you got the ongoing maintenance. And I think I'd kind of like to almost keep our core libraries doing all they can do. If there's money that can go from ARPA towards those, I'd be more interested personally.
Could you bring back some success stories, you know, show
With
how it's,
Bookmobile?
yeah, how it's working in
Sure.
other communities?
Sure.
So that we could get a better idea of, you know, what people are experiencing and what numbers they have and that kind
Okay.
of stuff. I don't know. It's, and it would be nice if it was rural versus, say, Stockton. I mean, it would be good to hear about Stockton too, because if it doesn't work there, it won't.
Oh, no, I
won't
know
work
it works.
anywhere, but
Yeah, I mean, and the other possibility with this, would be also delivering to folks that are homebound.
yeah.
And that is something that we were doing with volunteers, but it's more difficult. This, on the other hand, would make it much easier for us. You know, if we were up in that area and we scheduled a drop-off for a number of individuals along with going to a scheduled stop. I just wanted to, if I
Yeah.
can.
Here's a picture.
And
That'd be good, like at a farmer's market or something, you know, people are shopping, you know, you could, I don't know. But,
Oh, and Laura, it might be interesting to, you said Tuolumne had one and they may not be using it. Maybe we can find out why they didn't and avoid why they quit using it and avoid those same pitfalls.
Yeah, and I know El Dorado County also had a bookmobile. So, yes, I can certainly ask them. I know it was funding for staffing, I believe, and they had to cut branches, and it was considered a branch.
Oh, okay.
cause, the ARPA funds, we have time.
We have
So-
time, yeah.
So we don't really have to hurry up and make a decision here, right?
Yeah, we can bring this back in 2 weeks.
Okay.
But touching base with what Supervisor Oneto was asking, we are, making improvements through the ARPA funds on the computers at all of the branches. So, that's also in there, because of the fact that those have gotten,
Oh, yeah, they're out of date,
out
need
of
to be updated.
Well, I think, one other thing, the vans are pretty small, so wouldn't that be like confined space for COVID?
Not if you took it outside. That's why the awning was there. So if you brought everything outside, which you can do with book carts, and it's outside.
This isn't gonna be like the bookmobile where it's a big,
No,
like bus where you
No.
walk upstairs and go inside.
smaller van.
Yeah, there's
That-
not enough room.
Why don't we have Laura bring back some,
Yeah.
information on some of the stories from other counties, especially
Yeah.
more rural counties?
Okay,
Sounds good.
all right.
Well, thank you, Laura. Is there any public comment from the public? You wanted to comment, Karen? Well, please come to the podium and comment.
I'd just like to do a little clarification for what the Rescue Plan Act will cover, and technology is not one of the categories. So I'm a little concerned about the tech van. We would have to actually go at it a different angle where it's servicing disproportionate communities. That's where we're gonna have to kind of get it. I actually emailed the Treasury to get a finding whether that would be an eligible expenditure, and they came back and said that they are not approving expenditures. So we have to, when we're putting this out there, we have to decide whether we are willing to take that chance in putting that expenditure out there and trying to capture the category, because Kim and I are having a hard time kind of making it fit into one of the approved expenditure categories.
Okay.
What you're saying is they're not approving individual expenditures, saying that's okay,
Correct.
they have guidelines that you must follow.
Yes, and the guidelines are very vague, and we really would have to craft some kind of a justification to fit one of the expenditure categories that are eligible. And again, technology is not one of them. That's not one of the things that they're fighting. Broadband, general broadband was, but this really doesn't fall under that.
It doesn't, but it does, it is technology outreach to disadvantaged by definition.
But that's where we have to go. So it's not technology, it's more, it's reaching out to the disadvantaged, low-income communities. And that's what we're going to use to justify the computers as well, is that it's serving those people who need that kind of aid to do services online, that they don't have that kind of availability to pay for internet and computers and things like that at home. So that's where we're going with this. So just for general information.
Yeah, appreciate the information. You know, one thing I will say, I think ARPA funds can be used for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. I would think maybe you might get a better bang for a buck if we help some of the communities with some of their water and sewer issues. That's kind of one of my thoughts.
Understood. And I'm going to be bringing that back in 2 weeks too, because we've got the opportunity. We need to run a water to the landfill, and I'm going to ask you to include that in ARPA too.
Okay.
But that's not today's question.
Okay. All right. So we'll bring this back.
Laura.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. All right, item 4E, the minutes.
Move to approve the minutes of
I have some corrections.
21st and 28th with corrections.
Okay, I forget where I put mine.
Okay, with correction.
Yeah. In particular, it's not a typo, but when Sheriff Redmond took the time to clarify that the Board of Supervisors did not initiate negotiations with the tribe, he continued by stating he initiated negotiations. And then I want to clarify, even if we put it in parentheses or brackets, with respect to the Amador County Sheriff's Office, because he doesn't really have the authority, and I don't think that was implied in his comment that he was negotiating on behalf of the county with the tribe at that time. Is that okay?
Yeah, if that's the way you stated it, but I agree with your comment.
Yeah, okay. All right. So we have a motion and a second to approve the minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Here's
Or we adjourn.
Did you adjourn us?
Thank you.